Hey guys, tonight we are going somewhere you probably won't survive, and that's not me being dramatic, it's just math. Siberia's gulags weren't designed for comfort, they were designed for attrition. But since you're cozy, tucked in, probably agree, scrolling on your phone under a blanket, I'll take you there in story form instead of dragging you onto a cattle car. Before we really begin though, the ritual, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Otherwise, hey, don't fake it. Also, I'm curious, what city are you in right now and what time is it as you listen? I love imagining where you are as you hear these words. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on a platform in the dead of night. The rails stretch out endlessly, silver streaks glinting under a weak moon. Behind you, a soldier with a rifle taps the butt against his boot, bored but impatient. Ahead, a string of boxcars waits. Wooden cattle cars, their slats patched and splintering, their iron wheels groaning. Inside you hear coughing, a child's muffled cry, the stale smell of sweat that has seeped into timber after days of human cargo. You're herded forward, shoved inside, and the door slams shut like the closing of a tomb. Inside it's pitch black except for one slit of moonlight between planks. The air is wet, human breath condensing instantly into frost, and you're pressed so tightly against others that the very act of breathing feels like a competition. You can't sit, you can't move, you can only sway with the rocking car as it lurches into motion. Wheels screaming against steel, someone mutters prayers, someone else mutters curses, a hand clutches your sleeve, someone losing balance. But you're already one knot in this miserable knot of bodies. Fact-check reality for a moment. Trains really did carry tens of thousands to Siberia, sometimes taking weeks to reach the camps. There were no bathroom breaks, no comfort stops, just a pail into the corner that overflowed by day 2. And here's your quirky fact. The guards would sometimes stop not for the prisoners, but for the horses pulling sleds alongside the trains in the deeper Siberian tracks, because even horses needed rest. Human beings, though, not so much. Scholars still debate how much of this system was carefully planned logistics versus pure chaotic cruelty. Was it all designed this way? Or was it just the Soviet machine eating itself alive, piece by piece, with no one caring enough to fix it? The answer changes depending on which historian you ask. The rhythm of the train hypnotizes you after a while. Clack, clack, clack. You feel time bend, like hours are stretching into days. The smell inside grows unbearable, sour like old yeast. Your lips crack from thirst. You'd swear your tongue is turning into a dry rag stuffed in your mouth. Every so often the door scrapes open, and a gust of razor-cold air slices in, burning your lungs. Buckets of thin soup might be shoved inside, or maybe just hunks of black bread tossed onto the floor, where they vanish into desperate hands before you even blink. And the snow outside, you catch glimpses of it. Flat white fields like blank paper under the sky. Forests of black pines bent under heavy drifts. At night, sparks from the engine scatter into the dark like fireflies before dying in the wind. The prisoners whisper legends about wolves that follow the trains for miles, waiting for stragglers or corpses thrown off along the route. You're not sure if that's truth or folklore, but the way the guards glance nervously into the trees makes you wonder. A man next to you begins humming. It's low, tuneless, but it cuts through the rattling wheels. The guards bark at him to stop, but he doesn't. The sound swells, others join in, and for a moment the whole car is alive with ragged voices. They're not singing a song anyone recognizes, it's just noise, human noise, louder than the train, louder than the emptiness outside. Then silence crashes back down. You don't know if the man will be beaten at the next stop, but for now his defiance lingers in the air like smoke. Here's the odd thing, in a place designed to strip you of every shred of individuality, people still smuggled in fragments of themselves. A priest might still cross himself. A thief might carve his initials into the wooden boards. A mother might whisper lullabies to a child half asleep in her arms. Small rituals as fragile as breath, but they stitched together some thread of identity while everything else was being unspooled. Your mind begins playing tricks on you. The rocking motion feels endless, and you imagine you'll die inside this car, never seeing where it stops. Days blur. Frost creeps across your boots. Hunger gnaws your stomach until it's not even hunger anymore, just an ache that has become part of you. Like a scar, a prisoner near the door collapses and doesn't rise. No one moves. No one even reacts. The train doesn't stop. And then, jolt. Brakes scream. You're thrown against the wall of the car, heart hammering. The door scrapes open. A flood of air bursts inside, so cold it feels like knives. The guards shout, rifles swinging. Bodies stumble forward, forced into the snow. Your feet hit the frozen earth and you nearly collapse from stiffness. But you look up, and that's when you see it. Siberia. Not a map. Not an idea. The real thing. White stretching beyond imagination. Forests clawing at the horizon. A silence so total it swallows even the sound of your breath. And in that silence you realise, the train wasn't the journey. It was just the prologue. The real trial is only beginning. The first breath you take outside the cattle car is like swallowing broken glass. The air slices through your nostrils and burns down your throat, so sharp you cough instantly, doubling over. Guards shout and jab rifle butts to get you moving. Boots crunching on snow so hard it squeaks like brittle styrofoam. You blink into the pale daylight, though daylight feels generous. The sun hangs weak and hazy, a dull coin smothered behind drifting clouds. Siberia stretches in every direction, an endless canvas of white broken only by jagged forests and black mountains in the far distance. It feels less like arriving somewhere and more like being swallowed whole. The prisoners around you shuffle forward in chains or in rags, stumbling through knee-deep snow. Some are young, barely out of their teens, others grey-haired, eyes sunken into hollow sockets. Everyone squints against the glare. The light ricochets off the snow until your vision goes spotty, a constant shimmering blindness. Guards bark orders, but the words are almost irrelevant. The tone is what matters. Every syllable says, "You don't matter anymore." You pass a cluster of sled dogs tied to posts, their fur caked with ice, howling and snapping at the new arrivals. Their breath fogs into the air, thicker than yours, and their eyes track you with that predatory patience animals never lose. Odd fact here, Siberian huskies weren't just for transport. Guards sometimes set them loose on escaped prisoners. History records more than a few cases of dogs finding fugitives faster than soldiers ever could. It adds to the surreal equation, men starving, freezing, breaking rocks. While animals were fed and kept strong because the system trusted dogs more than human beings, you're marched past a barren clearing where guard towers loom on wooden stilts, silhouettes against the sky. Barbed wire encircles everything, sagging under the weight of frost, glittering like twisted necklaces. The towers look skeletal but alive, each one crowned with a searchlight and the shadow of a guard holding a rifle. Somewhere inside those beams of glass and metal you feel your humanity leaking away. One prisoner stumbles in the snow, too weak to rise again. The guard barely slows, just yanks him up by the collar and shoves him forward. He collapses once more and doesn't rise. The column keeps moving. No one dares break rank to help, that's the cruel arithmetic. You save him, you risk yourself. Some whisper that every prisoner was already counted as half dead on arrival. The state didn't bother distinguishing between who made it through the gate and who froze 10 paces away. Historically, these first glimpses of Siberia broke many people before the actual camp did. Memoirs describe the shock of silence, the immensity of land so desolate it almost mocked you. Some survivors later argued that this immensity was worse than the guards, worse than hunger, because it convinced you escape was impossible. Others debate this. Was it the landscape that crushed them, or the daily grind of systemic cruelty? Scholars still circle around that question, like wolves testing a fence line. The wind rises, carrying with it the sting of snow crystals like thrown sand. Your ears ache instantly, your breath crystallizes on your lashes, and even blinking becomes painful. You realize what makes Siberia so terrifying. Not just the cold, but the permanence of it. You can layer wool on wool, fur on fur, and it still seeps in. There's no true escape. Even the soil beneath your boots feels frozen into eternity. You're herded toward the camp gates, but before you reach them, you glance around and catch your first panoramic view. Behind you, the train is a toy in the distance, already shrinking, ready to vanish back into the west and leave you here. To the north, forest stretches like a black scar. To the south, nothing but rolling tundra. Eastward, the horizon dissolves into pale sky, indistinguishable from the land. Every direction says nowhere to run. At the gate, prisoners are halted. Guards step forward, fur hats pulled low, cigarettes clenched between lips. They look you over as if at livestock, nudging with rifle barrels, occasionally laughing at some private joke. One spits in the snow, the black stain freezing before it soaks in. Then, with a groan of metal, the gates swing open, and you step inside the compound. The yard is mud frozen into waves, like a sea turned to stone. Barracks lean drunkenly against each other, timber swollen and warped from years of ice storms. Chimneys smoke faintly, promising warmth but delivering only smoke-stained air. Dogs patrol the inner fences, their chains clinking as they lunge at passers-by. And over it all, silence. Not peace, not serenity, just the muffled quiet of snow swallowing every sound until you feel your own heartbeat louder than footsteps. One of the prisoners whispers to you as you pass under the gate, "Forget who you were before." That person is gone. You're not sure if it's advice or a curse. The gate slams shut behind you with a hollow clang that echoes longer than it should, as though even the sound wants to escape but can't. The first thing you notice isn't the barracks or the guard towers anymore, it's the way the camp swallows your name. Before you've taken 10 steps inside, a guard with a clipboard shouts numbers, rattling them off like livestock tallies. One by one, prisoners are stripped of whatever fragile dignity they carried with them. Your turn comes, and your name and the thing tethered to your whole life, family, friends, past, vanishes under the scratch of a pencil. In its place, a number. That's all you are now, a neat little code in Soviet bureaucracy. You're herded into a registration shack, the walls sweating with dampness despite the cold. The stench inside is a mix of ink, wet boots and fear. Guards bark orders, empty your pockets, hands on the shovel stripped down. Any little keepsake you've hidden is pried away, catalogued or tossed aside. A wedding ring? Gone. A photograph of your child? Confiscated or slipped into a guard's pocket. Even a button or a scrap of fabric is considered contraband. What you thought you could cling to is snatched with casual cruelty. Fact of history, the Gulag system was meticulous in its paperwork. Even in places where medicine was non-existent and food supplies crumbled, the records were obsessive. Pages upon pages tracking numbers, not lives. A strange irony. Prisoners starved, but the archives were well fed. The quirky side note? Sometimes clerks grew so lazy or cold that they reused the same prisoner numbers for entirely different people. Imagine that, you and another man across the tundra sharing the same numerical identity, like bureaucratic twins who'll never meet. Scholars still argue whether this obsession with order reflected Soviet efficiency or was simply a mask for total chaos. Did it actually keep the system running, or was it just theatre on paper while lives dissolved in the snow? You're ordered to stand naked for inspection. The floor bites your feet with its frost, the boards colder than iron. A guard walks down the line, pointing with his rifle barrel like he's picking out fruit at the market. He doesn't see you as flesh and blood, just as another expendable unit in the machine. You shift slightly, but his glare snaps you still. You realise quickly. Motion, hesitation, even an accidental gesture can earn you a strike across the face. When the uniforms arrive, the mockery is complete. You're handed rags that pass for clothing, thin cotton shirts, trousers that don't fit, boots stuffed with straw. Everything smells faintly of mildew and sweat from whoever wore it before you. The boots are worst. One is larger than the other, and both are cracked, leaking cold the moment you step back outside. Around you, men shuffle into their new skins, transformed instantly into rows of grey ghosts. A guard stamps your number onto a small piece of tin, a tag you'll wear on your chest. It clinks when it swings against your ribs. That sound will haunt you, because every clang reminds you are not a name anymore, just a tag in a ledger. You're marched to a table where an officer with ink-stained fingers scribbles furiously. He doesn't look at your face, just your chest where the number gleams. His pen scratches, pages flip. Somewhere in that mess of handwriting you cease to exist as the person who boarded the train. It's a burial without a grave. For a moment you think about home, a kitchen window maybe, or the sound of your mother's voice. But already those memories feel slippery, like trying to grip water in a frozen stream. The guard's constant shouting drowns it out, and the reality of the camp presses down. The only thing that matters here is endurance. And here's the strange, almost grotesque twist. While stripping you of identity, the system sometimes accidentally created new ones. Prisoners carved out reputations, the professor, the thief, the singer, nicknames that stuck harder than numbers. Human beings are stubborn about identity, will invent it out of nothing, even when it's forbidden. At the far end of the shack, a young prisoner tries to joke, muttering something about how his new boots will make him a ballerina. A guard smacks him instantly, knocking him against the wall. Blood spatters across the snow-dusted floorboards. No one laughs, no one reacts. The message is clear. Humour is dangerous currency here. You shuffle back outside with the others, your new uniform stiff and alien against your skin. The cold bites harder now, partly because you've been stripped of your own clothes, but partly because you've been stripped of yourself. The walls of the camp loom taller than before, the guard towers sharper. It's not just wood and wire, it's the erasure of everything you once were. And yet even as you line up in the yard, you feel a pulse of rebellion deep in your chest. The system can scratch your name off a ledger, hand you rags, stamp a number, but inside some stubborn spark whispers your real name. You cling to it scently, fiercely, like a secret flame cupped between frozen hands. You barely have time to memorise the new clink of your chest tag before they march you to the next ritual. Clothing, the camp's version of a makeover, if the stylist is frostbite and the runway is a snowdrift. The line shuffles toward a low timber shed that smells like wet wool, kerosene, and something medicinal that only pretends to be medicine. Inside, steam curls from a metal drum and a delousing stove ticks angrily, as if it resents every louse it's about to kill. A trusty prisoner, stringy, hollow-cheeked, and terrifyingly efficient, waves you forward. Stripped, he says, as if the word doesn't also mean become more naked than you've ever been in your life. They herd you first through the banya, the camp bathhouse. It's not luxury, it's logistics. You step into a room where steam sits heavy as soup, your skin flares under a spray of hot water that lasts exactly 3 heartbeats, just enough to shock the dirt loose and wake up the lice. Then comes the true scorcher, a delousing dust that stings your eyes and reaches the places you didn't know bugs could vacation. Men cough, curse, and scratch. Somewhere a guard laughs because pain is entertainment that doesn't cost rations. A frantic minute later, somebody shoves a tin of coarse soap into your hands, smells like old tyres and salt, and you scrub as if your skin is a guilty witness. Then the door opens, winter punches you in the lungs, and you stand steaming in the open yard, instant icicles forming in your hair. Congratulations, you're parboiled and flash frozen like a dumpling. Now, the issue window. Historical fact break. In many camps by the 1940s, standard kit meant a quilted jacket, telegreka, padded trousers, a cotton shirt, fingerless or mittened gloves, rukavitsi, a cap, and foot wraps, portyanki, instead of socks. Felt boots, velenki, were coveted winter gear, but not guaranteed. Guards or favoured prisoners got them first. Shalamov wrote that losing even a single foot wrap in Kolyma could mean frostbite within minutes. The trustee slaps a bundle onto the counter. Next, you take it all like gifts from a malicious Santa. You learn fast that clothing here is math, not fashion. Every gap equals heat loss. The shirt is a whisper of cloth. You double it under the jacket, and it still feels like you're wearing air. The telegreka is bulky, stitched with cotton batting that's half fallen out, the colour a grease-stained grey that manages to attract more grease by simply existing. The trousers cinch with a string that snaps when you look at it wrong. Your cap won't cover your ears unless you crush it down so hard you give yourself a headache. The gloves are mittens, good for keeping fingers together, bad for holding anything precise like a spoon or hope. The boots arrive as a punchline. One Valanok, one leather relic that's lost the will to be a shoe. The felt boot is warm but useless once wet. It drinks melted snow like it's been waiting for a bar all winter. The leather one is cracked like old lake ice, the toe scabbed with tar. The trustee shoves you a strip of cloth, foot wraps. You'll come to worship these plain squares. The trick, whispered from prisoner to prisoner, is to fold them tight and smooth, heel-locked, no creases. One wrinkle and it will cut your foot like wire by midday. You do your best imitation, wrap, tuck, then slide feet into mismatched footwear and feel the immediate truth. You are walking on borrowed time. Quirky survival hack of the day. Prisoners line their velenki with newspaper, birch bark, even scraps of cement sack, and rubbed boots with animal fat or candle stubs to waterproof them a tiny bit. Others stitched extra layers from stolen flour sacks. The pale cloth marked with state slogans now hugging ankles like a private joke. There are stories of men trading a week's bread for a single felt insole. Sounds irrational, until you realise warm feet mean living to trade bread again. The warehouse clerk, eyes glazed with boredom, scribbles on a card and barks your number. He does not look at your face. He stamps the paper like he's cancelling a train ticket. Your new kit is marked with crude patches and numbers bled into the fabric with purple aniline dye. The dye stings your fingers. The number on your chest echoes on your jacket sleeve, on your trousers, on your cap. Branding without fire. It's neat, tidy, and faintly absurd because the garments themselves are already dissolving into threads. A historical footnote with a barb. Those quilted jackets became icons of Soviet winter, issued to soldiers and labourers alike. After the war, surplus flooded the camps, and some argue the influx saved lives one thin layer at a time. Others point out the padding was so cheap and poorly stitched that it clumped after the first soaking, turning insulation into lumps. That disagreement feeds into a larger debate. Was the inadequacy of clothing a deliberate cruelty designed to grind prisoners down, or a byproduct of the Empire's rickety supply chain scattered across a continent of snow? Some scholars say intent is obvious. You don't accidentally underdress millions. Others counter that the entire system ran on scarcity and indifference. No one planned the suffering so much as tolerated it while focusing on timber quotas and ore tonnage. In a place where planners calculated work norms to the gram of bread, both readings feel chillingly plausible. You learn the barter value of fabric within hours. The blatniers, professional thieves with their own closed etiquette, hold court near the barracks steps, inspecting newcomers' mittens like jewellers. They can make a glove vanish while discussing the weather. A man with a decent pair of Valenki walks differently, and everybody knows it. A guard may confiscate them for a cousin, or trade them for cigarettes. Your neighbour in line whispers that he sleeps with his boots tied around his neck. Another ties his to his wrist with twine. Footwear isn't clothing here, it's life insurance. A seamstress unit. Women with needles, the lucky ones who have indoor work, patches tears with thread spun from unravelling other garments. You wait, item in hand, and watch as a woman's fingers move like a magician's, turning a ripped cuff into something that might, if you squint, survive one more week. She slides you a needle when the guard isn't looking. Don't lose it, she says. It's worth a bowl of soup. You tuck it into the hem of your jacket, your first hidden asset. Every evening, you brush frost and ice from seams that froze solid with your breath and sweat. You learn the choreography. Dry the boots by the stove without letting them bake. Stack mittens under your shirt to warm them with body heat. Sleep with your cap on. Stuff straw into the jacket lining and call it tailoring. You press your hands to your ribs and listen to the soft jingle of your tin tag against the telegraker, a metronome that keeps time with this new, smaller universe. On Banya Day, the whole camp becomes a slapstick tragedy. You sprint from steam to snow and back again, your garments hanging on pegs like a row of molting birds. Lice crackle in the delousing oven, and for 12 glorious hours you itch less. Then you put the clothes back on, and the cycle begins anew. Someone jokes that the lice have numbers too and are just finding their assigned seats. You smirk and clamp it down. Humour extracts interest here. You can't afford the fine. By the time the sun limps toward the horizon, you've learned the outfit's rule. It's never enough. You add, adjust, improvise. You tuck scraps into sleeves, twist rags into scarves, wrap your legs like a mummy. The frost laughs anyway, but in the huddle of men by the stove, you notice the tiny ways people fight back. Teaching a better fold, slipping a friend a spare scrap, swapping a left mitten for a right so both fits someone else. Unofficial tailors, boot whisperers, cap shapers. In a place built to erase, clothing becomes a quiet language of survival. You step into the blue dusk, jacket padded, trousers rustling, boots mismatched, but yours. The wind noses at every seam like a curious animal, then sinks its teeth. You square your shoulders. All right, Winter, you think. Let's see if this quilt and I can outstubborn you for one more day. The tag at your chest taps twice, once for the state, once for you. You breathe, and the air rings like glass. The barracks crouch at the edge of the yard like a row of tired animals, timber dark with age and weather, roofs hunched under a hard frosting of rime. A guard waves you towards one as if he's pointing to your forever home on a grim real estate tour. The door drags when it opens, wood swollen, hinges complaining, and a broad breath of air rushes out that's equal parts smoke, damp wool and human. You step in and feel the temperature change, and not to warmth, but to a different flavour of cold. Indoor cold, stale and used. A blanket that's been sneezed into for years. Inside, the light is the colour of old tea, what little gets past windows filmed with ice. Frost crawls the panes in feathered patterns that would be beautiful if they weren't also a diagnosis. Wind comes through somewhere. Drafts slide under the door and whisper through the wall seams, making the candle flames stutter. The floor is a patchwork of boards scabbed over the mud, tracked with snow that never quite melts. In the centre squats a black iron stove, dented and scorched, the camp's reluctant sun. It radiates heat for a 2-metre circle, then gives up, leaving the outer beds to the wolves. You find your allotted space on the nary, rough plank bunks stacked 2, sometimes 3 high. It's generous to call them beds. They're shelves for the living, each plank wide enough for 2 bodies if everyone agrees not to roll. You climb up and the wood flexes like an old boat dock. The mattress is straw stuffed in a sack that leaks. The pillow is a rumour. You set your boots under your head and thread a cord through the straps, knotting it around your wrist. By morning your neck will kink, but your boots will still be yours. Welcome to interior design by hypothermia. Bunks clustered toward the stove if you have status. Banishment to the outer reaches if you don't. Historical fact to nail this down. Memoirs from Kolyma, Vorkuta, Norilsk, and dozens of lesser-known camps describe barracks crammed with triple-decker bunks, housing hundreds in a single room, with a single iron stove and windows stuffed with rags or paper. The plank bunks, the nary, were the norm, and the lucky few near the stove paid for that privilege in favours, bribes or fists. It wasn't just where you slept, it was a social map of power. You test your new blanket, thin, stiff with old soap stamped with numbers like a cattle brand, and tuck it tight around your feet. A veteran prisoner slides in beside you, nodding at your strung-up boots. "Good," he says. "Now your spoon." You raise an eyebrow. He shows his, a dull metal spoon tied to his wrist with twine, the handle tucked up his sleeve so it clinks if anyone tries to lift it in the night. "People steal anything," he says. "Spoons are easiest to sell, so quirky but true. There's a whole microeconomy around spoons, a currency in a place that pretends money doesn't matter." The stove barks as someone feeds it a handful of chopped wood. Heat slides across your face, then stops at your chest as if the air has borders. The men closest to it doze with open mouths, steam curling from their lips. Those on the far bunks hunch inside their coats, breath fogging, eyes sunk deep. There's a rule posted, no drying boots on the stove, because leather splits, felt burns and smoke fills the room. But the rule is mostly decoration. People risk it anyway, hovering shoes near the stove door the way city folk hover hands above a radiator. You learn quickly the rhythm of evening. Feed the stove, nurse your toes, thaw your gloves, fight the drafts with rags shoved into cracks. Bedbugs wake before you do. They march out of the seams the moment bodies heat the boards, a living drizzle that sets nerves on fire. Men slap, curse under their breath, scratch until skin scabs. Someone swears there's a sweet spot. If you sleep half outside the blanket and keep your feet hot, they prefer the other guy. A fringe tactic. Some smear a thin ring of laundry soap around the edge of their bunk, claiming the bugs won't cross. Science is not impressed, but desperation is a better laboratory. Rats skitter the rafters, drop to the floor with soft plops, and go about their night business. Absolute monarchs of the crumbs. You hide your bread in your cap and your cap under your back. You dream of cats. Your neighbour tells you the draft has a name, the little river, because it finds you every night and flows through your bones. You trace its path with your hand, under the door, up along the wall where a board has split, across your bunk like a ghost on patrol. You stuff the gap with a page torn from a camp newspaper. The headline screams about steel production. You use it to stop the wind from freezing the tip of your nose. The stove pops again and dies a little. A trustee scowls and locks the wood box. Nights burn fuel faster than rations allow. Here's where the scholars argue. Was the barracks cold a deliberate tool of control, keep people too numb to rebel, or just the math of scarcity on a continent-sized construction site? Some accounts insist stoves were throttled as punishment. Others point to logistical chaos and the sheer distance supplies had to travel. The debate loops back to intent versus indifference, like everything here. You don't have time for theory. Your toes are bargaining for their lives. A guard steps in for a count, breath smoking. The door open long enough to let half of Yakutia inside. He stares down the rows, lips moving, 1, 2, 3, then snaps it shut and leaves. Rooms like this depend on discipline by ritual. Counts, lights out, wake-up searches. Even with the ritual, the barracks hum with subroutines. A thief slides along the floorboards, silent as a shadow. The professor in the corner whispers grammar rules to himself. A woman from the sewing brigade, lucky enough to sleep near the stove, threads a needle in the dying light. patching a stranger's sleeve for an extra ladle of soup. You close your eyes and try to trick your body with a trick someone taught you. Breathe slow. Pretend you're warm. Picture a sunlit room, a window open to summer, a bowl of cherries, the click of a bicycle wheel. Your brain complies for half a minute. Then a draft sighs across your ankles and your imagination trips over its own scarf. You pull your jacket tighter and curl like a comma. Somewhere a man starts a song under his breath, something about a road and a river, and 3 voices join, then 5, and then it stops because the door creaks and nobody wants to be noticed. A small mercy on Banya Day, when the delousing oven cooks a generation of lice to ash. You come back to a barracks that almost feels new. Sheets, such as they are, hang in the steam like ghosts. For 12 hours, you aren't moving your hand under the blanket like a fiddler tuning a violin. By tomorrow, the bugs will be back, coin-operated and tireless. But for now, the boards smell faintly of carbolic, and that counts as luxury. As you drift toward a thin sleep, the room clicks and settles, wood talking in cold syllables. Your tin chest tag taps once against your sternum. The stove breathes shallowly, a tired animal. You whisper your name, not the number, the name, and feel it hover in the air above your bunk like warm breath. Someone turns, the boards creak. Outside, the guard tower light swings a slow arc. Inside, the drafts keep their rounds. The barracks of timber and rot hold you the way a broken hand might hold water. Badly, reluctantly, but enough to keep you until morning's whistle. Morning hasn't really begun when you meet the commandant. It's still the grey between night and day, the hour when frost glues breath to the inside of windows and the camp lies silent except for the crackle of the guardhouse stove. Then the whistle tears it open. The barracks shudder awake, boots pulled on stiff as boards, numbers mumbled in half-sleep, mittens shoved onto hands that are already numb. You shuffle outside into the line-up yard, snow squeaking under your mismatched footwear, and that's when he appears. He doesn't march, he strolls. A man in a long fur coat, high boots polished like black glass, a pistol at his hip. The hat is what catches you. An enormous fur ushanka, ear flaps tied up so it looks like the crown of some carnivorous beast. His face is all angles, cheeks raw from the cold but eyes sharp and small, glittering like chips of obsidian. He carries himself with that casual cruelty of someone who never has to rush, because time itself waits for his orders. This is the commandant, the sovereign of your new world. He paces down the line, boots biting into the snow with deliberate rhythm. You can feel the prisoners stiffen like trees in wind. He stops at random intervals, plucking at a jacket sleeve, nudging a prisoner's chin up with the tip of his cane. The cane, yes, another accessory, more symbol than tool, though he uses it to jab ribs, flip caps, or knock a man to his knees with a crack across the shin. You realise quickly, he doesn't need to pull the pistol. The cane is enough. Historical fact, camp commandants varied wildly from drunken bureaucrats who barely showed themselves to tyrants who treated the camp as personal kingdoms. Some names became infamous, whispered like curses, Naftali Frenkel, the architect of labour quotas, or even Nikishov, Kolima's iron ruler. Survivors remembered them less as individuals and more as forces, embodiments of cruelty institutionalised. The quirky twist? Some commandants cultivated bizarre hobbies. One reportedly bred exotic pigeons in a camp where men froze to death. Another staged amateur theatre performances using prisoners as actors, the same prisoners he'd send to punishment brigades the next morning. Imagine auditioning for Hamlet at night and cutting timber until your hands bled at dawn. It sounds absurd, but absurdity was often the point. It reminded you who could bend reality here. The man in front of you trembles slightly, boots sinking in the snow, and the commandant stops. He studies the prisoner's cap, too loose, tilted on his forehead, then smacks it off with the cane. The cap lands in the snow, instantly soaking, ruined. "Discipline," the commandant says in a voice that's surprisingly soft, almost intimate. The prisoner bends to retrieve it, but a guard kicks it farther, laughing. The commandant doesn't join the laughter, he just watches, eyes unreadable, before moving on. The silence he leaves behind is heavier than any shout. The debate among historians is whether these commandants were true believers in Stalin's system or opportunists who thrived in it. Were they ideologues, enforcing labour as a holy duty to the party, or petty despots savouring unchecked power? Memoirs split sharply. Some depict them as drunk on ideology, quoting slogans while prisoners starved, others as cynical pragmatists, caring only for quotas and bribes. Perhaps the answer is both, blended in the way only totalitarian systems can allow. He finishes his inspection with a small flourish, lighting a cigarette, exhaling smoke that curls in the freezing air. He doesn't offer one to his guards, instead he flicks the match onto the snow, where it hisses and dies. Then, without a word, he turns back toward the guardhouse, coattails swinging. The message is clear, his presence is the law even in absence. Later you'll hear stories about him, that he once had a prisoner executed for singing a folk song too loudly, that he saved another from the punishment cell because he needed a chess partner, that he keeps a gramophone in his quarters and plays Tchaikovsky every evening with vodka in hand. The truth is probably tangled in all of it, because myth is survival too. You learn to map the terrain of his moods through rumour, like reading cracks in ice before stepping onto a frozen river. When he's gone, the yard exhales. Shoulders slump, breath plumes heavier, and the line begins to shuffle toward work detail. But his shadow lingers. You feel it pressing down the way the tower lights press into your back at night. He doesn't need to be everywhere. He's already in your head. You glance at the other prisoners, faces blank, eyes low, and realise the most dangerous thing about the commandant isn't his cane, his pistol, or his hat. It's that he's utterly ordinary in this extraordinary cruelty. He walks, smokes, sleeps, eats, and yet his existence dictates the misery of hundreds. That ordinariness is the real horror. A reminder that the machinery of suffering doesn't need monsters, just men who decide not to see the humanity standing in front of them. The whistle rips through the camp while the sky is still black, a long metallic shriek that seems to come from the bones of the earth itself. You jolt awake in your bunk, teeth already chattering, because the air inside the barracks is colder than when you fell asleep. The stove died hours ago, and the frost has crept back in, crawling across walls and biting through blankets. Around you, bodies stir, boots scraped on floorboards, coughs, hacking like broken engines. No one wants to move, but the whistle is non-negotiable. It drags you into the day whether you're ready or not. You jam your feet into stiff boots, yank your quilted jacket over aching shoulders, and stumble outside with the others. The cold is immediate, a slap across the face so sharp it makes your eyes water. The stars haven't faded yet, scattered diamonds above the camp, and the snow reflects their light so brightly you feel as though you're walking inside a frozen lantern. Guards bark and shove, herding you into lines in the yard, their rifles slung casual but heavy. Roll call is a ritual, and rituals in this place are sharper than religion. Everyone lines up in rows, boots aligned, shoulders squared. The commandant doesn't appear this morning. Instead, his deputies stalk the lines, counting with the precision of accountants. A man shivers uncontrollably, knees knocking, and the deputy sneers before striking him with the butt of a rifle. No blood, no words, just a reminder. You are here to be counted, not pitied. Historical note: roll call in Gulags could last hours, even in temperatures that would kill exposed skin within minutes. Prisoners stood still until every number matched the ledgers, sometimes recounted over and over if guards miscounted, or if someone had died overnight and the paperwork didn't add up. Survivors recalled standing motionless until their toes blackened, until eyelids froze shut. The absurdity was that the counts rarely matched anyway. Chaos had its own arithmetic. The quirky fact: prisoners sometimes tried to trick the system by resurrecting the dead, propping corpses upright in the line to keep the numbers even. Guards occasionally noticed, occasionally didn't, depending on how drunk they were or how desperate the quota was. Imagine the dark comedy of it. A cadaver swaying in line, head lolling, and a guard sighing, "Fine, good enough, move on." The roll call drones on, each name replaced by numbers barked into the freezing dark. Your lips numb so badly that when your number comes, you barely manage to croak it out. A guard glares and repeats it louder as if to punish your hesitation. Around you, prisoners cough, shuffle, and occasionally collapse. Collapsing isn't the end, it's the beginning of humiliation. If you fall, others are ordered to drag you upright, shove you back into place, or leave you half buried in snow until the count is done. Scholarly debate lingers here too. Was the drawn-out ritual of roll call deliberate psychological warfare, or simply bureaucratic obsession spiralling out of control? Some historians argue it was designed to break spirit, to reduce prisoners to statues, frozen and obedient. Others claim it was just the inertia of Soviet paperwork. If Moscow demanded precise counts, then by God every snowflake would be tallied, even if it cost 100 toes. Either way, the outcome was the same, misery codified in the rhythm of a whistle. The minutes stretch into eternities, your breath hangs in the air like a frozen veil, and you dare not shift even when your knees lock. To move is to invite attention, and attention is the last currency you want here. You focus instead on the crunch of boots as guards pace the lines, on the way the stars fade into dawn, on the sound of your own heartbeat drumming against ribs already bruised by cold. Finally, with a barked command, the count is declared complete. The relief is not joy, it's merely the end of one torment before the next begins. The line breaks, prisoners shuffle toward the gates, and you realise you're already trembling uncontrollably. This was just standing still. Soon you'll be walking into work, but something small and human happens in the shuffle. The man beside you, grey-haired, hands shaking so badly he can't tie his mittens, nudges you with an elbow and mutters, "Keep moving your toes, don't stop, not even standing, little marches." He demonstrates, his boots twitching almost invisibly in the snow. A trick, a survival tip, passed quietly from one doomed man to another. You copy him, flexing inside your boots, and feel the blood return like tiny pins stabbing your skin. It hurts, but it's life. And so roll call ends, not with triumph, not even with dignity, but with survival by inches. The whistle fades, the guards heard, and the march begins. You don't look back at the barracks. There's no point. Everything that matters now is forward, into the endless white. The gates creak open, and the column of prisoners lurches forward like a single reluctant animal, joints stiff, breath leaking out in pale banners. The snow underfoot squeaks in that special way only airless cold can coax from it, each step a tiny shriek. You fall into a place somewhere in the middle, shoulders tucked, chin buried in the greasy edge of your collar. The sky is still a bruise, no sunrise yet, just a hint of iron grey where east should be. A dog barks behind you, the sound clipped and businesslike, and the line tightens without anyone saying a word. Guards take their stations the way chess pieces take theirs, one on skis skimming the flank with a rifle slung easy, another at the front setting the pace, a third bringing up the rear with a dog straining at the leash. The chain isn't literal for everyone, only the punished or the suspect walk in pairs with cuffs or rope, but you feel chained anyway, linked by the rule that you do not break the line, not even to tie a boot. When the line moves, you move. When it stops, you freeze where you stand and call it resting. Your tin tag taps softly against your chest in rhythm with the steps. Clink, step, clink, step. The first 100 paces hurt the most. Your feet, recently thawed by the stove's last breath, protest like they have been betrayed. You do the toe-marching trick the old man showed you at roll call, tiny flexes inside the foot wraps, a clandestine jig, and the pain turns from knives to needles. The wind arrives late, loping out of the timber in sly gusts that test every seam of your quilted jacket. It noses under your cap, up your sleeves and down your collar, cataloguing your vulnerabilities. You offer it nothing but your back. Historical fact. In many camps, the march to the work site could stretch 5, 10, even 15 kilometres each way, done in temperatures that dip to 30, 40, sometimes worse. Prisoners remember arriving already exhausted, hands too numb to grip an axe, with guards writing any delay into ledger books as laziness to be punished later. Stepping out of the column, even to relieve yourself, was sometimes logged as attempted escape, a charge that could end with a bullet or a month in the punishment cell. The route itself was part of the discipline. Your boots discover the path's personality, packed snow that holds, then drifted patches that swallow ankles, then a treacherous glassy sheen where yesterday's slush refroze. The felt of your left Valanock drinks any melt it can find like a drunk in a dry county. The right leather relic tries to skate. You keep your balance with small, dignified panic, arms close to your sides, because flailing invites laughter, and laughter invites attention, and attention is a luxury item you don't want. Ahead, the line snakes toward the black edge of the forest, a procession of humped shoulders and rag hats, everyone moving in the same narrow lane like ants under a glass sky. Quirky fact for your ever-expanding survival handbook. On bright spring days, prisoners sometimes fashioned snow goggles from scrap, cardboard, or thin wood with slits cut across, tied with string around the head. They looked like half-finished Halloween masks, but the thin slots cut the glare and saved eyes from snow blindness that could knock a man out of work for days. In winter proper, when the sun barely shows, the improvised masks morph into flour sack face wraps with pinholes to breathe through. Tiny ghost faces bobbing down the path, primitive, ridiculous, and effective enough to be coveted. The sleds groan alongside the column, runners whispering as they carry tools, picks, axes, tampers, chains. A coil of rope that looks like it remembers better days. Sometimes a horse leans into its harness, steam pumping from its nostrils like twin engines, thin as the prisoners but somehow better fed. The guard on skis slides ahead to scout a drift, then plants a pole to mark the safe line. There's no conversation in the column, just the rhythm of feet and the occasional cough. Silence isn't a rule, it's a resource. Spend it well and you might make your breath last to the tree line. You measure distance in small bargains, make it to that black stump. Okay, to the stand of birch with the peeling paper bark. Now to the kink in the frozen stream where the ice makes a dull, hollow note under your heel. The forest smells faintly of resin and old smoke, and that scent, pine pitch and ash, feels almost like food. You tuck it into your mind alongside the last good smell you knew. Laundry on a summer line, or your father's pipe, or fresh bread. The wind tries to blow those out too, but you cup them like the ember of a cigarette stolen behind a shed. There's a superstition that surfaces around the 3rd kilometre. The man on your left, a scholar by the look of his fingers, lifts a glove and taps his own tin tag 3 times with a knuckle. For luck, he mutters, voice muffled through wool. For count. For return. He does it every morning just before the forest swallows the path. Another prisoner spits to the side to check the wind. The gob freezes mid-fall and shatters like sugar. A fringe habit catches on. Some bite a strip of birch bark as they walk, swearing it keeps the mouth from cracking and tricks the brain into thinking it's drinking. Science rolls its eyes, the brain desperate doesn't. The guard behind you yells at a laggard to close the gap, the word bystree snapping like a twig. You quicken a fraction without changing your stride, a prisoner's magic trick. Faster without moving faster. Your mittens creak where the sweat inside has frozen, and you keep your thumb tucked under your fingers to save it from the wind. There's a lesson nobody taught, but everyone learns. Your hands are coins. Spend their warmth only when you must. A raven follows the column, black on white, hopping from larch to larch with the confidence of royalty. It croaks once, an ugly sound, and you think, because your brain needs stories, that it's taking attendance too. The dog sniffs the wind and whines, and you catch a scent you can't place. A river under ice, maybe, or the memory of warmer mud. For a flash, you imagine turning left and walking until the white gives up a town, a cabin, a kitchen with a chipped blue bowl. The imagination is a generous liar. The dogs were trained for that lie. The forest, especially, does not negotiate. Here's the scholarly debate that clacks in the back of your head like loose teeth. Were these long marches an intentional tool to wear prisoners down and discourage escape, or just the geometry of remote industry? Mines and logging tracks where they happened to be, with barracks set where transport allowed? Some historians hold that inefficiency was cruelty by design, a slow bleed of calories turned into compliance. Others argue that the Gulag was a jury-rigged economy sprawling across impossible distances. The walking was a logistical compromise, not a calculated torment, though it worked as torment all the same. You don't resolve it, you just walk. Occasionally the line stops dead. A human traffic jam around a drift or a blown bridge of ice, and the rear guard uses those moments to stare down the row, counting. If someone crumples where they stand, the count doesn't pause. 2 prisoners hook elbows and drag the fallen through the snow like a sack of grain until the man lurches back upright. The rhythm must not break. The sleds tinkle as their chains settle. A guard glides past on skis, his face as blank as a new ledger page. You study the footprints ahead to place your own. Step where another man's soul has already compressed the snow. Pack the path a little denser, steal a fraction of his work. You tuck your scarf tighter, cram your cap down until it pinches your brow, and breathe through your nose even when it burns. Your toes count like metronomes. 1, 2, 3, don't go numb, and you bribe them with promises of the stove at lunch that you know will be lukewarm at best. The birch bark in your cheek softens into a bitter wad. You keep it anyway. When the forest finally opens to the work site, it's like stepping onto a stage that forgot its play. Cut stumps stipple the slope like rotten teeth. Piles of frozen logs lie rigid as bones, banded with ice. A hoist creaks somewhere, a skeletal arm against the lightning sky. The foreman, a prisoner with a clipboard and a hat nicer than yours by exactly one patch, waits with a list that decides who gets axe, who gets pick, who gets the joy of hauling sleds. The guards fan out to their posts, forming a perimeter that blends into trees and snow and the idea of a wall. You flex your hands and feel the mittens crackle. The line dissolves into smaller knots, each man drifting to his brigade like water finding its level. Breath smokes, the dog shakes and dusts the air with frost. A guard posts a sign on a post where everyone can see it. Work norm, black letters that might as well be carved into your ribs. You read it and pretend you don't. The tin tag on your chest taps twice. Somebody mutters a curse that turns to crystals. The day at the site hasn't begun, but the march has already taxed your body's little bank to pay for it. You stand there, waiting for your name that isn't a name to be called for a tool, and you glance once over your shoulder at the path you've just made. A faint grey groove in the white leading back toward fences and drafts and bedbugs and the small circle of heat. It looks impossibly long, even now. You don't let yourself imagine the same distance back at dusk. You tighten your cap and open your hands for the weight of iron. The forest holds its breath. Then someone shoves an axe into your mitten and says, "Don't lose it." As if you could ever afford to lose anything again. The axe lands in your mittened hands with a dead weight, handle polished smooth by thousands of desperate palms before yours. You heft it once, and the absurdity hits. This is wood against permafrost, a toothpick against steel. The foreman barks a number, your brigade's work quota, and you shuffle with the others to your designated stretch of frozen earth. The ground stares back at you like iron, grey and glassy, locked in ice centuries deep. Somewhere behind you, the guards light cigarettes, satisfied they've already won. You raise the axe and bring it down. The blow rings through your arms, metallic vibration that numbs your elbows. The blade bounces. No crack, no chip, no satisfying wound in the soil, just the echo of futility. The man beside you grunts and swings his pick with similar results. The sound is like church bells rung by starving men. Sparks leap up, tiny fireworks against the bleak sky, then vanish instantly into the cold. Historical fact, mining and construction work in permafrost was often done with hand tools, picks, shovels and axes, because machinery either froze, broke, or never arrived. One method, Kostrovanie, involved burning fires directly on the ground overnight to thaw the upper layer of permafrost. In the morning, prisoners shoveled away the ashes and hacked at the softened crust before it refroze by midday. The process was backbreaking and laughably inefficient, but the system demanded it. You try the fire-softened ground trick one morning, and for a fleeting hour the pick actually bites. The earth yields a shallow scar, dark soil revealed like treasure. But the victory is cruelly brief. By the next day that wound is frozen shut again, harder than before, as if the land resents being touched. You realise Siberia is not neutral, it's actively hostile. Quirky fact to lighten, or maybe darken the scene. Prisoners sometimes used their own body heat as tools. Memoirs describe men urinating on frozen axles, locks, or even picks to loosen them. The joke was bitter. Our bodies are the last fuel they can't ration. You wonder if that's bravery or resignation, and then you swing again because philosophy doesn't count toward the quota. The quotas, normie, are posted in neat black letters, absurd as commandments. So many cubic meters of earth, so many logs cut, so many loads hauled. Impossible numbers, drawn up in offices far away by men who never touched a frozen pick. Fail to meet them, and rations shrink from already starvation to guaranteed death. The math is flawless. Less work, less food, less life. You feel it in your stomach, a ledger kept in hunger. The scholarly debate here circles like crows. Were these quotas intended as extermination by labour, or were they just Soviet bureaucracy believing in numbers more than bodies? Some argue the Gulag was a death machine disguised as an economy. Others claim it was an economy that happened to kill. The documents list tons of ore, hectares of timber, miles of canal, but they don't list you. That silence is the most eloquent part. The hours drag, sweat forms despite the cold, soaking your shirt until it freezes stiff. Your mittens turn to clubs of ice. The axe handle slips in your hands, blistering skin even through calluses. You glance at the guards and their faces tell you, don't stop, don't even lean, so you swing again, teeth clenched, lungs burning. Each blow feels like it carves nothing but seconds off your life. At lunch, if you can call it that, you shuffle to the fire pit where a pot of soup sloshes thin broth into dented tins. The liquid is more memory than meal, hot water flavoured with cabbage. Maybe a stray grain of barley if you're lucky. Bread comes in slices so thin you can see the firelight through them. The veterans cradle their ration as if it's a newborn, tearing it into precise pieces to trick the stomach into believing it's more. You learn to eat slowly, tongue savouring each crumb as though it were steak. The guards don't hide their feasts. They unwrap someone's sausage, tear into loaves, pass around flasks. The smell drifts over like an insult. Once, a guard tosses a gnawed crust into the snow. A prisoner dives for it, shoves it in his mouth before it freezes solid. The guard laughs until he wheezes, then lights another cigarette. The cruelty is not in the crust. It's in the performance. When the whistle calls you back to work, your legs ache as though they've been replaced with iron rods. Swing, grunt, chip, repeat. The forest watches silently. Ravens gather on stumps, heads cocked, black feathers against white. They seem to know something you don't. Perhaps they are waiting for their ration too. By dusk, your brigade's progress is a mockery of the quota. The pit is shallow, the logs stacked low. The foreman scrawls numbers anyway, fiction dressed as fact, because quotas are satisfied on paper long before they are satisfied in earth. You wipe your face with a mitten stiff with ice and realise your breath is a white fog that refuses to leave you. The snow has swallowed your footprints almost as soon as you made them. The march back is slower, bodies hunched, silence broken only by coughing. The sky bruises to black, stars stabbing through like pinholes in a frozen sheet. Your arms throb, your stomach twists, your boots grind raw against ankles. You keep moving because to stop is to be noticed, and to be noticed is to vanish. By the time you stagger through the camp gates, the barracks look almost welcoming. Almost. The stove will smoke, the bunks will scratch, the bedbugs will feast. But it is shelter. And in this landscape, shelter is enough. You collapse onto your plank, muscles humming like broken wires, and your last thought before sleep is this. The earth itself resisted you today, and tomorrow you'll fight it again. Morning again, and the whistle doesn't so much wake you as drag you out of a shallow grave of half-sleep. You peel yourself off the plank, shoulders stiff, every joint creaking like frozen hinges. Outside the guards herd you into formation, but today the march veers not toward the mine pit, but deeper into the taiga forest. The trees loom in the distance. Black spires against a sheet of grey sky, and the line of prisoners stretches toward them like ants on a frozen countertop. The axes feel heavier today, though they are the same as yesterday. Your mitten grips the handle, wood polished smooth by sweat and frost, and you join the slow march into the forest. The air is sharper here, thick with the scent of pine resin, a perfume so clean it almost feels like mockery when paired with the stench of sweat-soaked uniforms. Your boots sink into the snow with muffled crunches until the snow gives way to roots and frozen needles that stab through the soles like hidden nails. When the guard calls the halt, you know what's coming. Logging, clearing timber for rails, barracks or firewood. Sometimes even for export, because the state demanded wood, no matter how far from Moscow it was chopped. You take your position, feet planted in snow, and raise the axe. The first blow thunks into the trunk, a dull, hollow sound. The shock races up your arms, rattling your teeth. Again and again. Chips fly, pale yellow against white, scattering like bird feathers. The tree is indifferent, swaying slightly as if shrugging you off. Historical fact, logging was one of the Gulags' core industries. Trees were felled by hand, often in temperatures that snapped steel. Norms required a set number of cubic meters per man, quotas that could take days of labour to approach, yet were demanded every day. Memoirs tell of men too weak to stand, propped against trees to keep swinging. Each chop a tick of survival against starvation. The quirky fact, some prisoners swore that licking pine sap gave them strength. Sticky, bitter, but with just enough sugar to trick the body. Others chewed on bark as if it were jerky. Birch bark especially became an improvised ration, shredded into strips and gnawed until jaws ached. It didn't nourish, but it gave the illusion of chewing something real, and sometimes that illusion was as valuable as calories. You work in rhythm with the others. Swing, grunt, breathe. The cold keeps sweat from forming, but your muscles burn hot inside the frozen shell of your jacket. When the tree finally cracks with a gunshot crack, all sound freezes for a heartbeat. Then the trunk groans and topples, branches snapping as it crashes into the snow, shaking the ground. You step back just in time to avoid being crushed, and the guard grins as though the forest's surrender is his triumph. The stumps rise like gravestones behind you. Piles of logs grow, lashed together with rope and dragged by sleds to collection points. Horses strain against their harnesses, hooves slipping on ice, flanks steaming. A prisoner trips, drops his end of a log, and the guard lashes him with a whip, not to speed him, just to remind everyone else what happens when the rhythm breaks. Scholars argue whether Gulag forestry actually contributed meaningfully to Soviet industry, or whether it was symbolic labour, punishment disguised as production. Some evidence suggests the wood-fueled mines, railroads, and even exported lumber shipments. Others point out that inefficiency, loss, and sabotage meant much of it rotted in piles. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, an empire's hunger for resources eating men faster than it ate trees. By midday, your shoulders scream with every swing. You glance at the others and see the same pain carved into their faces, yet there's also something strange in the rhythm, an accidental solidarity. When one man falters, another steadies the log. When a branch snaps back, someone mutters a warning. The forest work is killing you, but it's shared in a way that makes it almost tolerable. The silence is broken by the sound of chopping, a grim orchestra that binds the brigades together. At lunch, you huddle by the fire pit with your tin of watery soup. The warmth seeps into your hands even before the liquid touches your lips. You ration your bread with surgical precision, tearing off crumbs and letting them dissolve slowly. Someone beside you pulls a scrap of bark from his pocket and chews it between bites of bread, as though pairing fine wine with a crust. You almost laugh, but laughter feels like spending money you can't afford. The afternoon stretches long. The forest groans as more trees fall, each one collapsing in slow motion, branches exploding into snow. Ravens wheel overhead, black confetti against a grey sky, croaking approval. A guard smokes, leaning casually against a stump, as though the labour itself is a kind of entertainment. He calls out occasionally, "Faster! Norm! Norm!" as if shouting the word could bend the trees to his will. When dusk finally creeps in, your brigade has a neat pile of logs stacked high, their resin scent clinging to your clothes. You're herded back onto the path, tools slung across shoulders, arms trembling with exhaustion. The march home is a blur of snow and breath. The forest recedes behind you, leaving only stumps like a cemetery of effort. Back in the barracks, the warmth of the stove feels almost holy. You collapse onto the plank, muscles spasming, ears still echoing with the rhythm of axes. You close your eyes and smell pine sap on your hands. For a moment you almost believe you're somewhere else. A lumber camp, perhaps, not a prison. But the tin tag tapping against your chest insists otherwise. The forest will be there tomorrow, waiting. So will you. Dinner is over before it begins, a hunk of black bread the size of your palm weighed to the gram, and a bowl of watery soup with floating cabbage threads that look more like ghosts than vegetables. You eat it slowly, not out of strategy but necessity. Chew each crumb as if it's the last solid object in the universe. Let the broth scald your tongue so it feels like food instead of warm water. Your stomach doesn't complain anymore. It just gnaws quietly, a wolf too tired to howl. The bread is sacred. It arrives from the camp bakery, bricks stacked in sacks, each loaf divided into precise rations. Prisoners work in the bakery too, watched as closely as if they were guarding gold, which, in a way, they are. A gram missing is a crime. Bread is cut with string to keep the slices neat, then weighed again to the last crumb. Even so, the foreman's knife hand often slips when cutting his own. Everyone sees, no one speaks. Historical fact, bread rations were directly tied to work norms. Meat quota, you get 600 grams. Fail, and you drop to 400 or even 300. That's about half a loaf a day to fuel 10 or 12 hours of labour in sub-zero weather. On paper, science said it was enough. In reality, it meant slow starvation. The quirky detail. Prisoners developed elaborate rituals for bread. Some cut their ration into 7 pieces, one for each hour of the workday. Others hollowed out a crust to save a core for night, nibbling at it like contraband candy. A common superstition warned never to trade your whole ration at once. It was like giving away your soul. The act of tearing bread became a ceremony, tiny fingers of control in a place designed to take all control away. You learn the tricks quickly. Hide the ration in your cap, because leaving it in your pocket makes it freeze stiff. Warm it near the stove just long enough to soften, but not so long it draws eyes. Some men toast theirs on shovels, browning the crust to make it seem like more. One man swears by dipping his ration in hot water. Makes it swell, fills the belly. He laughs as he says it. But the laugh is dry. Soup comes in endless variations of almost nothing. Cabbage water, millet husks, potato skins boiled until they disintegrate. Sometimes a rumour spreads. Today there's horse meat. The line surges with energy, only to sag when the soup turns out to be the same grey broth as always. On rare occasions, a piece of fat floats at the top like a jewel. The lucky one snatches it, chews quickly, swallows without tasting. Fat is life, fat is fuel. Scholars still argue whether the rations were intentionally set to starve, or simply the product of a failing system. Some point to documents showing exact calorie counts calculated to the decimal, proof that starvation was policy, not accident. Others argue supply lines collapsed in Siberia's vastness, and guards ate little better. Both might be true. What's undeniable is that hunger was the constant overseer, more feared than the guards, more relentless than the dogs. At night in the barracks, food becomes the only topic worth speaking of. Men whisper recipes like prayers. Someone describes a roast chicken in such detail you can smell the garlic crisping on the skin. Another swears his wife once baked a pie filled with cherries so red they stained his fingers. You close your eyes and listen, letting the phantom fade, the flavours fill your mouth. This oral cooking becomes a survival game. They call it fantasies, and it's the only feast you'll ever have here. Sometimes desperation warps into theft. A man wakes to find his bread gone, his boot still tied to his wrist, but his ration vanished from under his head. Panic erupts, accusations fly, the barracks becomes a snarl of curses. The guards don't care, let hunger police itself. The man weakens over the next days, his ribs showing, his eyes hollow. Everyone knows the thief, but no one names him. Silence is safer than justice. And yet, there are flashes of generosity too. Once, when you finish your thin soup, the old scholar beside you pushes half his bread into your mitten. "You're younger," he mutters. "Live longer." You shake your head, try to refuse, but he insists. The gift tastes like sawdust and sorrow, but also like something you can't name, proof that even here, a man can still act like a human being. The hunger never leaves. It follows you to sleep, curls up in your ribs, gnaws your dreams. You dream of kitchens, of tables heavy with bowls, of smells so rich they wake you. But when you open your eyes, there is only the barracks, the draft, the coughs, and the morning whistle waiting to drag you back into another day of swinging axes and counting crumbs. Hunger is the camp's truest commandant. The others carry rifles. It carries eternity. You start to notice that in this world, survival isn't just about strength or endurance. It's about cunning. Hunger gnaws at everyone equally, but not everyone responds the same way. Some turn sly, others ruthless, and a few discover talents they never knew they had, like how to barter a broken spoon into a night of safety. The camp has its own economy, and you quickly learn its currency isn't rubles. It's bread, cigarettes, favours, scraps of cloth, even words whispered at the right time. Cigarettes are king, even for non-smokers. They're more precious than food. A single one can be split into 3 trades: the paper for rolling, the tobacco for smoking, the butt for stuffing into a crack in your boot to keep snow out. Men sell them for bread slices, gamble them in whispered card games, or bribe guards with them for the chance at a softer work assignment. Sometimes the guards themselves trade, slipping a cigarette to a prisoner in exchange for information or for simple amusement. It's strange watching someone inhale smoke with the same reverence a priest gives a prayer. Historical fact, the Gulags ran on shadow economies. Official wages existed on paper, but in reality cigarettes, bread and warm clothing circulated as hard currency. Prisoners learned to fix boots, forge spoons, weave mittens from unravelled sacks, all services paid for with crumbs or smokes. Theft was rampant, but so was barter. Every item had value. Nothing was truly trash, the quirky detail. Salt became an unlikely luxury. It was rationed poorly, so prisoners licked axe handles, iron nails, even turned stones hoping to taste the mineral. Some survivors recalled trading half a bread ration for a pinch of salt, claiming it gave them the will to keep swinging tools. Others swore salt reduced frostbite, rubbing it into their mittens like some alchemical charm. Whether true or not, salt's reputation turned it into camp gold. You find yourself caught between temptation and necessity. Your neighbour offers to swap your spare foot wrap for a ladle of soup. You hesitate. The foot wrap means dry feet, but the soup means calories now. Do you gamble the future for the present? Everyone faces that question daily, and no answer is clean. Then there's theft. Bread disappears in the night, mittens vanish, spoons get lifted from sleeping hands. Guards don't interfere. They know hunger polices itself. Thieves or blatni hold power in the barracks. They walk with swagger, tattoos crawling up their necks, eyes sharp as knives. They steal openly and dare anyone to object. To fight them is to invite a knife or worse. To ignore them is to survive another night. But survival isn't only theft, it's craft. You watch a man peel strands of wire from the fence during work detail, hiding them in his boot. Later, he twists them into a crude needle and sells it for bread. Another prisoner slices slivers of wood into chess pieces, trading games for favours. Even humour becomes barter. A good storyteller earns extra soup just by distracting men from their misery for an hour. Scholarly debate lingers here. Was this shadow economy resistance or collaboration? Some historians argue it was a rebellion, proof that even stripped of everything, humans rebuild society from scraps. Others claim it served the camp system, keeping prisoners alive just long enough to meet quotas, a self-regulating mechanism of survival that replaced official rations. Either way, it blurred lines between victim and accomplice, thief and saviour. At night, you tuck your bread under your head, your spoon tied to your wrist, your boots looped with cord. You whisper trades in your mind like prayers, half bread for mittens, mittens for warmth, warmth for tomorrow. The man on the bunk above you mutters in his sleep about sausage, his hands twitching as if kneading dough. Hunger has turned everyone into merchants of fantasy. Then one evening, the scholar you've befriended slips you something wrapped in cloth. Inside, a cigarette butt barely an inch. He doesn't smoke, but he knows you can trade it. Use it carefully, he says, voice low. You stare at the stub as though it's gold. In this place, it might as well be. You don't sleep well that night. Not because of bed bugs or drafts, but because you're calculating how to spend it. Soup? A patch for your boots? Or keep it? Hold it close like a talisman, a reminder that value still exists even in this wasteland. You tuck it deep into your pocket and close your fist around it until your fingers ache. In the darkness, you realise survival here is not about hope in the abstract. It's about strategy in the smallest details, trading scraps of life to buy just one more day. You learn quickly that the guards don't need to invent new punishments. Routine is punishment enough, but that doesn't mean they won't add flair. The brutality comes in layers, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, always calculated to remind you who owns your bones. A shove with a rifle butt in the ribs because you lagged half a step behind. A kick to the shin when you stoop to retie your foot wrap. A slap across the face just because your eyes happen to rise too high. None of these gestures are about discipline. They're about theatre. Pain as performance. The dogs amplify the show, muzzles froth with white breath, chains clink, teeth flash. You notice the guards rarely need to unleash them. Just a lunge, a growl, and the line stiffens instantly. It's efficient psychology. Why waste a bullet when a bark makes men freeze harder than the snow? The animals become characters in this grim play, co-stars with rifles slung lazily on human shoulders. Historical fact. Accounts from Gulag survivors describe guards who varied from indifferent bureaucrats to sadists, who took pride in inventing torments. Some enjoyed striking prisoners with the flat of their bayonets, others favoured kicks, others simply let men collapse from exhaustion. Violence wasn't constant in the cinematic sense, but it was always near, ready to flare without warning. The quirky fact? Some guards cultivated odd pets among the prisoners, men singled out for a trick, a song, or a story. A guard might slap a man daily for amusement, but then slip him an extra ladle of soup afterward, as though cruelty required a tip. In one camp, a guard reportedly made a prisoner recite poetry before roll call. If he stumbled, the man was beaten. If he succeeded, he got tobacco. Brutality became ritual entertainment, absurd and deadly in equal measure. You experience your first real taste of it one afternoon. You're hauling a log with 3 others, shoulders bent, arms trembling. The snow is uneven and your boot catches on a hidden root. You stumble, the log drops, and a guard is on you instantly. He doesn't shout, doesn't even seem angry. He just brings the rifle butt down across your back with casual precision. The blow drives you to your knees, knocks the breath out of you. For a moment, the snow is all you see, cold seeps into your skin before you're yanked up and shoved forward again. The log waits, unmoved by your pain. You expect pity from the others, but there is none, only silence. Not because they don't care, but because pity is dangerous. To help is to draw attention, and attention is a debt no one can pay. Later, when the guards aren't looking, a man brushes snow from your shoulder, his gesture quick, almost invisible. That's the closest thing to comfort you'll get. Scholars debate whether Gulag brutality was systemically ordered or the byproduct of unchecked authority. Some argue that violence was written into the blueprint, a deliberate method of control. Others insist it was improvisation, underpaid, undertrained guards venting frustration on bodies that couldn't resist. The truth may be both, a structure built on cruelty staffed by the men eager to practice it. At night, you replay the blows in your mind. The ache is deep, bone deep, but what lingers more is the humiliation. You realise the real punishment isn't the pain, it's being reminded how little your body belongs to you now. Even the rhythm of your steps is theirs, orchestrated by whistles and shouts. You rub the bruise with your mitten, but it feels less like healing and more like a mark being absorbed, another tattoo you never chose. And yet, within this brutality, there are slivers of humanity. Guards who avert their eyes when a prisoner falters, who let a man rest, half a breath longer than allowed, who occasionally drop their cruelty like a stone and walk on. These moments are rare, fragile, and impossible to predict. But they prove something unsettling, that brutality here isn't constant fire, it's a switch flipped at will. That's worse somehow, because it means the violence isn't inevitable, it's chosen. When the whistle shrieks the next morning, your back still throbs, but you rise with the others. You march, swing the axe, haul the sled you would. You wait for the next shove, the next rifle butt, the next arbitrary strike. It will come, but until it does, you breathe, you move, you endure. Because in this theatre of cruelty, the only role left for you is survival. By now you've figured out that the barracks aren't just places to sleep, they're ecosystems, kingdoms carved from planks and straw. And like any kingdom, there are rulers and ruled. The most obvious divide is between the politicheskie, the political prisoners like you, and the blatni, the professional criminals. The guards might wear rifles and fur hats, but inside the barracks, it's the thieves who write the law. The blatni swagger in with tattoos crawling up their necks, stars on shoulders, crosses on knuckles, daggers inked down their arms with soot and urine. Their language is thick with slang, curses woven like embroidery. They've spent lifetimes in jails, know every trick of the trade, and treat the gulag not as punishment but as a familiar address. This isn't exile to them, it's home turf. They claim the bunks nearest the stove, steal food in broad daylight, and dare anyone to challenge them. Historical fact, Stalin's Gulag system deliberately mixed politicals with criminals, hoping the thieves would dominate and destabilize the intelligentsia, clergy, soldiers, and common peasants branded as enemies of the people. It worked. Political prisoners, many of whom were teachers, doctors, writers, people unaccustomed to violence, were thrown into a world where a man would slit your throat for half a crust of bread. The quirky side of this arrangement? The Blatnier carried their own rigid code, the Vorovskoy Zakon, the thieves' law. They refused legitimate work, despised collaboration with authority, and lived by theft and intimidation. Yet the Gulag twisted even that code. Some thieves accepted privileges from guards, becoming enforcers or informants. Others remained purists, tormenting suckers, the politicals, as a way to maintain their outlaw honour. It was an upside-down morality, but morality all the same. You see it unfold daily. A political prisoner carefully folds his bread ration, tucking it under his head at night. By morning it's gone, lifted by a thief who eats it in front of him just to watch the despair. Another political smuggles a spoon into his sleeve, an heirloom carved from wood, but the Blatnier take it, toss it back and forth like a toy, then snap it in half and laugh. It's not about the spoon, it's about hierarchy. Scholars debate the extent of this state-engineered chaos. Some argue Stalin intentionally weaponized the criminal caste to crush solidarity among the class enemies. Others suggest the mixture was simply logistical, filling quotas with whoever was arrested that week, regardless of background. Whatever the intent, the result was the same. The barracks became arenas, and survival meant picking your battles carefully. There are rare moments, though, when the divide blurs. One night a thief hums a song, a prison ballad older than the revolution. A political joins softly, adding a verse from a folk hymn. For a heartbeat, The whole barracks listens, the air thick with something dangerously close to unity. Then a guard slams the door, barking for silence, and the spell breaks. But you remember it, because it proves the wall between worlds isn't always absolute. Still, the tension is relentless. You keep your head down, guard your ration like treasure, and learn the etiquette. Don't sit on a thief's bunk, don't touch his things, don't speak unless spoken to. You're not respected, but if you're careful, you can be invisible. And invisibility in this place is almost a luxury. At dawn, you march beside a thief who flicks ash from his stolen cigarette and grins. "You politicals," he says, "you think too much. Out here, only hands and stomach matter." He laughs and strides ahead, smoke curling behind him like a banner. You watch his back and wonder if he's right. Maybe thought has no weight in this frozen kingdom. Maybe only hunger rules. Rumours of escape surface like bubbles in swamp water are rare, fragile and usually toxic. You hear them first in whispers during the night. Men huddled on lice on mountain bunks with blankets pulled over their heads as if secrecy could warm them. "He slipped out past the wire," someone murmurs. "He's halfway to the Yenisei by now." Another voice adds, "They'll never catch him. He had a map." The words hover in the smoky barracks like contraband themselves, little sparks of hope too dangerous to touch. In daylight, though, the reality of escape presses down hard. You've seen the forest swallow footprints within an hour. You've seen the wind flatten snowdrifts until paths vanish. Guards with rifles are one thing. Siberia itself is the true sentry. Endless tundra, unmarked rivers frozen into mirrors, forests so dense they choke the sky. And the cold, always the cold, ready to gut anyone foolish enough to step into it without shelter. Historical fact, escapes did happen. Prisoners fled, alone or in groups, often driven by desperation more than strategy. Few survived. Some were tracked by dogs and shot, others froze within days, their corpses found curled under trees, and some simply disappeared, never heard from again, leaving only rumours behind. Quirky fact, one escape story, half folklore, half documented, tells of a group who fled with no provisions but each other. They were later discovered with bones stripped clean by teeth marks, hinting at cannibalism. Some survivors swore it happened more than once. Whether myth or truth, such tales were repeated in camps, not as warnings, but as grim entertainment. The idea of freedom twisted into horror fascinated men who knew they might be desperate enough to try. You begin to notice small signs. A prisoner spends nights sewing scraps of cloth together into something that looks like a pack. Another hoards crumbs, drying them into hard pellets. Someone else asks suspiciously specific questions about guard rotations. You don't need to be a genius to see what's happening, but you also don't ask. Knowledge is liability. If you know too much, you might share their punishment. When an escape attempt fails, the camp becomes theatre again. Guards drag the unlucky back through the gates, faces black with frostbite, legs bound, eyes wild. Sometimes they're paraded in front of the line at roll call, beaten bloody before everyone. Sometimes they're simply gone, no trial, no announcement, just absence. And the dogs whining at the memory of the chase. The scholarly debate burns around this point. Did escape stories sustain prisoners with a shred of hope, or did they deepen despair by showing how futile freedom was? Some survivors claimed just knowing escape was possible kept them alive. Others said the very rumours hollowed men out, convincing them that freedom was only another kind of death. Perhaps both are true. Hope and futility braided together, impossible to separate. One night as you lie on your bunk, the scholar whispers to you, "Would you try?" His voice trembles like the draft in the wall. You want to say yes. You want to imagine yourself striding across white fields into a warm kitchen, into arms that remember you. But your lips freeze around the truth. No. Not because you don't want freedom, but because you know Siberia's jaws would close before you reach the first ridge. Still, in your dreams, you sometimes walk beyond the wire. The snow is softer there, the sky brighter. You move without guards, without numbers, without tin tags clinking on your chest. The forest opens instead of closing. For a moment, the dream tastes like freedom. But always, just before you wake, you hear the crunch of snow behind you. Dogs, rifles, boots, and you know the dream, like the rumour, was only another trick of survival. You don't need to be told about punishment cells, you can feel their presence the way you feel the shadow of a gallows in an empty square. They sit at the far end of the yard, low log structures half buried in snow. doors like black mouths. The guards call them kartzer or shizo, depending on mood. But prisoners call them the iceboxes. The nickname isn't poetic, it's practical. Step inside and you're a piece of meat left to freeze. The first time you see one up close, the door creaks open and a man stumbles out, supported by two others. His face is grey, lips cracked and bleeding, eyes unfocused. He looks less like he's walking than being carried by sheer stubbornness. His knees fold in the snow and he crumples. The guards laugh. You understand instantly. The punishment isn't supposed to correct. It's supposed to erase. Historical fact. Punishment cells in gulags varied. Tiny wooden huts, windowless stone pits, or converted storage sheds. Temperatures often dropped below freezing, and prisoners were given little more than rags, sometimes not even boots. Bread and water rations were cut in half. Some survived days inside, others didn't survive a single night. Quirky detail, there were standing cells, barely wide enough to turn around, where men were forced upright for hours or days. A few camps even experimented with wet cells, where water froze on the floor so feet were perpetually numb, skin peeling off in strips. Stories circulate that rats lived in some punishment holes, crawling over men too weak to swat them away. No one knows how much is fact and how much is prisoner folklore, but either way the message was clear. You will leave less human than you entered. The scholar tells you about his stint inside. The trick, he whispers, is to keep moving. Squat, stand, don't stop even if you want to. If you stop, the cold eats you alive. He chuckles dryly. Of course, the cold eats you alive anyway, but at least you make it chew slower. Scholars argue whether punishment cells were used as calculated terror, deterrence for others, or simply as dumping grounds for those who broke the fragile machinery of quotas and roll calls. Some survivors insist they were tools of sadism, wielded capriciously. Others suggest they were bureaucratic necessity. The Gulag had no room for negotiation, so discipline was handled by ice. Either way, the result was the same. Bodies broken, spirits thinned like smoke. One evening, you watch as a prisoner is dragged toward the icebox. His crime? Talking back during roll call. His number didn't match the ledger, he tried to explain, and when the guard barked, he raised his voice. That was enough. They shove him inside, slam the door, and the silence afterward feels heavier than the thud of a rifle butt. The next morning, you half expect to see him at roll call again. Shivering but alive. He doesn't appear. No explanation, no body, just subtraction. Is the kind of disappearance the Gulag specialises in, quiet, efficient, anonymous. His bunk is filled by nightfall. The barracks adjusts, the stove still smokes, the lice still bite. Life keeps gnawing forward. And then, one day, you're the one the guard's finger finds. Maybe your tool slipped. Maybe you didn't shout your number loudly enough. Maybe it's random. That's the cruelty. You'll never know why. You're marched to the icebox, boots crunching, chest hollow. The door yawns. Inside, the cold is absolute, a weight pressing from all sides. The walls are damp logs rimed with frost. There's no stove, no straw, just a floor hard as stone and air sharp enough to shred lungs. You crouch, then stand, then crouch again, trying the scholar's trick. Your teeth rattle in rhythm. You hug your arms tight, whispering your name like a charm, your body bargaining with itself to stay awake. Minutes stretch into eternities. Hunger claws. Toes burn, then go numb. Your breath coats the walls in frost until it looks like you've been painting your cell with ghosts. Time loses shape. You can't tell if it's been an hour or a day. Your only companion is the sound of your chest tag clinking faintly when you shiver. When the door finally opens, you stumble out like a puppet with cut strings. The light blinds you, the wind stabs you, but even pain feels like a kind of relief. You don't remember being carried back to the barracks. You only remember waking on the plank, limbs stiff, men staring at you with the mix of pity and calculation that marks survivors. Someone tucks half a crust under your hand without a word. You eat it with teeth that barely work. From then on, you don't need to be reminded about the punishment cells. You carry the memory in your bones, in the ache that flares each time you squat, in the way your toes don't warm properly even near the stove. The icebox never truly lets you out. The camp infirmary sounds like a reprieve when you first hear about it. A place for the sick, a pause from labour, maybe even warmth. But the reality is a cruel parody of healing. The building is barely warmer than the barracks, its windows sealed with rags, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and boiled herbs that don't actually exist in the broth they claim is medicine. The beds are the same planks you sleep on every night, only closer together, lined with men too weak to lift their heads. Illness is everywhere. Typhus, dysentery, scurvy, pneumonia. Take your pick, the Gulag has the full menu. Coughs echo like gunfire and fevers burn hot even as the room stays freezing. You see men with gums swollen and bleeding, teeth wobbling loose, legs bruised yellow from scurvy's grip. Others waste away in silence, faces hollow, eyes staring at ceilings they'll never walk under again. There's no isolation here. The sick lie cheek by jowl with the nearly dead, sharing air like it's the last thing worth trading. Historical fact, the Gulag infirmaries, called lazaretkas, existed more for statistics than for treatment. A prisoner declared sick was written off as unproductive and shuffled into the records differently. Supplies were nearly non-existent. Medicine often amounted to aspirin or chalk tablets. Sometimes doctors, prisoners themselves, had nothing more than boiled water to offer. Yet they were still forced to keep ledgers, neat columns of symptoms and deaths, as if numbers could disinfect reality. A quirky detail. Some prisoners believed onion peels had miraculous power against scurvy. They'd chew them raw or steep them in hot water, drinking the bitter liquid like holy medicine. Guards sometimes tossed a peel into soup pots as proof of nutrition. Survivors later joked bitterly that onions were rarer than diamonds. Still, the myth gave men something to cling to, faith in a cure even when the cure was a scrap of garbage. The camp doctor is a prisoner too, a gaunt man with spectacles that fog when he breathes. He mutters to himself in clipped phrases, part Latin, part Russian, part exhaustion. You watch him shuffle from bunk to bunk, pressing fingers against swollen necks, peering into eyes glazed with fever. His tools are a stethoscope missing an earpiece, a thermometer cracked down the middle, a scalpel dulled to a butter knife. Yet the prisoners look at him as though he were a saint, because even a gesture of care in this place feels like a miracle. You end up in the infirmary one night after collapsing during roll call, knees buckling from exhaustion. They drag you here, drop you on a plank and move on. The doctor squints at you, shrugs, and scribbles something in a notebook. Rest, he says. It's not advice. It's a diagnosis. He hands you a tin cup of hot water that tastes faintly of rust. You drink it anyway, warmth sliding down your throat like liquid metal. The scholarly debate surfaces again. Were infirmaries acts of mercy within the machinery of cruelty, or just another cog in the bureaucracy of death? Some argue they prolonged lives just enough to keep the workforce turning, a cynical form of maintenance. Others suggest they represented human resistance, doctors and orderlies doing what little they could to preserve dignity in the face of indifference. In truth, both readings can be true. You feel both as you lie there, half grateful, half certain you're just being catalogued for later disposal. Around you, the infirmary hums with low voices. A man mutters prayers, another whispers recipes he'll never taste again. Someone sings, a thin thread of sound that rises and fades like steam. It's not harmony, but it's human. You close your eyes and the chorus of coughs and groans becomes a strange lullaby. When you're deemed well enough, which means you can stand without collapsing, you're sent back to labour. Your illness doesn't vanish, it just becomes background noise, another layer of ache among many. You return to swinging axes with lungs that rattle and knees that shake, because in the Gulag, healing isn't about health. It's about whether you can still be useful, and yet, you remember the doctor's hand on your wrist counting your pulse, his fingers cold but steady. For one moment, someone measured your life, not as a quota or a number, but as a heartbeat. In this place, that brief recognition feels as valuable as medicine itself. For all the cruelty, for all the cold and hunger, the camp isn't completely barren of light. Small acts of humanity slip through the cracks like stubborn weeds between paving stones. They don't erase the misery, but they make it survivable in the smallest, strangest ways. One evening, after a day of logging that left your arms shaking like broken branches, you slump on your bunk with your bread ration clutched tight. Before you can eat it, the old scholar nudges your hand and whispers, "Break it in half." You frown, thinking he means to steal, but he smiles, thin and tired. Half now, half later. Stretch time, stretch life. You obey, and when the second piece touches your tongue before sleep, it feels like you've outwitted the system itself. Another night, you're shivering by the stove when a prisoner beside you produces something miraculous. A harmonica. dented and dull, its notes weak but real. He plays, and the barracks, usually thick with coughs and snores, hums a lave. Men close their eyes, nodding in rhythm. Some mouth words silently to songs remembered from villages and cities they may never see again. For 3 minutes, the lice, the drafts, the hunger, all step aside. The guards don't burst into stalemate, maybe because even they crave music's reminder that they aren't just shadows with rifles. Historical fact, music, poetry and storytelling flourished in gulags, quietly, dangerously. Prisoners recited Pushkin or sang folk ballads, sharing scraps of culture like contraband bread. Officially, such gatherings could be punished as subversion. Unofficially, some guards tolerated them, knowing they calmed restless barracks. In certain camps, entire clandestine theatres emerged, with costumes stitched from rags and plays performed in whispers. Quirky fact, prisoners sometimes smuggled jokes from camp to camp, a dark comedy circuit. Why is Siberia so big, one went? Because not everyone can fit in Moscow. The humour was grim, but laughter, even bitter laughter, reminded people they were still human. Survivors later swore these jokes saved them more than soup ever did. You start noticing smaller mercies too. A thief who usually bullies everyone tosses a splinter of sausage to a sick man, pretending not to care. A woman in the sewing brigade stitches an extra patch on your trousers, her needle moving faster than the guard's gaze. Even a guard once, just once, turns his head while you slip a piece of birch bark into your pocket. These aren't revolutions, they're the flickers. But flickers mean fire somewhere. The scholarly debate here is fascinating. Do these small acts prove that humanity can survive anywhere, or are they just survival tactics dressed as kindness? Some historians argue they were strategies, ways to ensure reciprocity. Help there, help now, get help later. Others insist they were genuine sparks of compassion, irrational gestures in a place where rationality meant selfishness. Perhaps the truth doesn't matter. What matters is that they happened, and that men remembered them decades later with tears in their eyes. One day, while marching back from the forest, you stumble. Your legs lock, your chest heaves, and you're ready to collapse into the snow. The man next to you grips your elbow, steadying you. He doesn't speak, doesn't look at you, just keeps walking with your weight balanced on his arm until you find your rhythm again. No one notices, and that's the point. The gesture is invisible to the guards, invisible to history, but to you it's life. At night, lying on the plank, you realise something. Survival here isn't just about calories or boots or quotas, it's about these sparks. A shared crust, a whispered joke, a song hummed under breath. They don't change the gulag, but they change you. They remind you that even when stripped bare, numbered, beaten, you are still capable of giving, still capable of receiving. And in the silence before sleep, when the drafts whisper through the cracks and the stove exhales its last breath, you find yourself repeating one truth like a mantra. They can freeze the body, starve the stomach, erase the name, but they can't quite kill the flicker. And as long as it flickers, you're not gone yet. Seasons change in Siberia, not with gentle transitions, but with dramatic swings that feel like being hurled from one extreme to another. Winter dominates, of course, smothering the land for most of the year. Endless darkness blankets the camp, sun vanishing by mid-afternoon, leaving prisoners to trudge back from the work sites under a sky already ink black. Lamps swing from posts, halos of dim yellow struggling against the void, while the rest of the world dissolves into shadows and silence. Nights stretch so long you forget what daylight feels like. In this polar dark, the camp transforms. Roll call happens by torchlight, guards' faces glowing orange against the blue snow. The dogs seem larger, their eyes burning with reflected flames. You march to work, guided only by stars and the occasional beam of a guard's lantern. The line of prisoners more ghostly than human. Even the forest groans differently at night, branches snapping with a sound like distant gunfire. Sleep becomes a currency. Men lose sense of time, waking in pitch black and asking if it's morning or midnight. Historical fact, Gulag camps in the far north endured weeks where the sun barely rose, hovering like a weak lamp above the horizon. Work did not pause, quotas didn't shrink. Men laboured in near-constant twilight, eyes straining against gloom, bodies confused by the absence of rhythm. Survivors recalled the disorientation as worse than hunger. Time itself broke. Then suddenly, summer arrives, and it is its own torment. The snow melts into sucking mud that clings to boots and fills barracks with stink. The sun refuses to set, glaring 20 hours a day, bleaching sleep from your eyes. Men lie awake on bunks, staring at cracks of light slicing through shutters. Your body begs for rest, but the sky sneers. Not tonight, not tomorrow, maybe never. And with the heat comes the real plague. Mosquitoes. Swarms rise from every swamp and puddle. Black clouds that descend on bare skin until you're nothing but welts and blood. They crawl into ears, noses, even mouths, if you're unlucky enough to fall asleep without covering your face. Prisoners march to work flailing, scratching, swearing under their breath. Guards laugh at the spectacle. An army of skeletons fighting insects with more desperation than they fight hunger. Quirky fact, some prisoners swore that smearing themselves with mud helped, turning skin into a second crust. Others burned damp branches to create thick smoke, standing in the choking haze just to get a moment's peace. There were tales of men tying grass around their heads like veils, creating primitive nets. Nothing worked for long. The joke became that the mosquitoes were part of Stalin's guard corps, unpaid but effective. The extremes warp your sense of reality. In winter, you pray for warmth, even if it means thaw and mud. In summer, you beg for frost, even if it means numb toes. You realise Siberia is never merciful. It only shifts the method of torment. Cold, darkness, light, insects. It doesn't matter. Survival demands constant adjustment. Scholars still debate which season was deadlier. Winter killed through exposure and frostbite, summer through exhaustion, disease and infections from insect bites that festered in filth. Some survivors insisted winter was kinder. At least you could freeze quickly. Others argued the endless buzzing of summer was its own psychological execution, grinding sanity away, night after night. The debate is academic. Both seasons took their share of lives. You remember one night in midsummer, lying on your bunk, too hot to breathe under your blanket, too vulnerable to lie uncovered. The barracks hums like a hive, dozens of men slapping their skin in syncopated rhythm. Someone starts humming along, turning the slaps into percussion, and soon the barracks is half music, half torture. You laugh, delirious, swatting at your own arms in time, until the guard shouts for silence and the room collapses back into buzzing misery. And in winter again, when the dark returns, you find yourself almost nostalgic for the mosquitoes. Almost. Because the silence of snow, the black sky pressing down, the ache in your bones as frost needles its way into every seam, that silence is heavier than any insect swarm. Siberia gives you no favourite season, it only asks which poison you'd like today. By now you've realised the camp is not just about labour and punishment, it's also an economy, a living black market stitched together from scraps and hunger. The official system is simple. Work, earn rations, survive. But the unofficial system hums louder, more intricate, more human. Bread, tobacco, boots, cloth, even Badu words, everything is currency. You live in a bazaar where no stalls exist, only bunks and whispers. The Blatny rule this economy, of course. They swagger with cigarettes tucked behind ears, trading them for bread or favours. A single cigarette might buy an extra ladle of soup, or a night of protection, or even a pawned spoon. The criminals hoard, redistribute, tax. It's less barter, more organised crime syndicate. They keep ledgers in their heads sharper than the guards' paper books, and woe to anyone who forgets a debt. Historical fact. Gulag economies ran on a system of barter so strong that cigarettes, bread and clothing circulated like coins. Some camps even had prison money issued on slips of paper, but those were useless compared to real currency. Food. Bread was the ruble of Siberia. One slice could buy you a patch for your trousers, half a slice could rent a warmer bunk for the night. Nothing was free. The quirky twist, soap, when it existed, was worth more than rubles. A sliver could be traded for meals or used to carve crude figurines that prisoners sold as trinkets to guards. Soap became both hygiene and art supply, a bizarre dual role in a place that offered neither. There are stories of prisoners carving tiny chess sets from soap, the pieces dissolving slowly in sweaty palms during games. You watch and learn. A spoon tied to your wrist becomes a kind of bank account. A spare foot wrap folded under your bunk is insurance. You once trade half your bread for a scrap of pencil and paper, not to write a letter, those never arrive, but to scribble notes, fragments of thoughts that remind you you're still capable of making marks in the world. That scrap becomes more nourishing than the bread you lost. The scholar, always the teacher, explains the laws of this shadow economy. Never give the whole ration away, split it, keep half. Never gamble unless you're willing to lose your boots. Always hide a reserve crumb in your mitten during meals, because tomorrow you'll hate yourself if you don't. You nod, memorizing like catechism, because in this church bread is holy and sin is starvation. Scholars still argue whether the Gulag economy represented resistance or compliance. Was it proof that human beings will always build systems of exchange even in hell? Or was it a twisted extension of Stalin's order? Prisoners running their own miniature version of state capitalism. Some call it survival, others call it complicity. You don't care what they call it. You care whether your mittens stay on your hands through the night. One night you witness a deal that feels almost mythic. A man trades an entire week's ration for a pair of felt boots. Everyone gasps. It seems insane, suicide by barter. But winter arrives the next morning with teeth bared, and the man with boots marches strong while others limp frostbitten. He survives. The others whisper, envious. Was it foolish or brilliant? The economy doesn't care, it's just another gamble in the eternal casino of hunger. And there's the guards too. They pretend the black market disgusts them, but you see them trading cigarettes for trinkets, leather belts for sausage smuggled in from the kitchen. One even slips you a scrap of newspaper in exchange for birch bark fire starter. The line between guard and prisoner blurs here. Everyone's hungry, everyone's bargaining. At night, as the barracks groans with snores and coughs, you feel the weight of this economy pressing against your chest. Every crumb is a coin, every gesture a transaction. You dream not of gold or rubles, but of bread, soap, tobacco, and the quiet relief of a pair of dry socks. In Siberia, wealth isn't measured in what you own, it's measured in what hasn't been stolen yet. Letters are supposed to be lifelines, but here they feel more like bait. You scratch one out on a scrap of paper the guards provide once every few months, your pencil stub trembling in mittened fingers. I am alive, you write. I am healthy. Lies, of course. You're not healthy, and you're barely alive. But those are the only words that might slip past the censor's knife. You long to write about hunger, cold, the ache in your bones, but you know every line will be read, stamped, and maybe shredded before it ever leaves the camp. The rules are clear. No complaints, no politics, no mention of quotas or guards. Letters must be sterile, stripped of pain. They become strange poems of absence. The weather is cold, but I am well. How is your health? I think of you often. You read them back and almost laugh. They sound like postcards from some frosty vacation instead of dispatches from hell. Historical fact. Gulag letters were censored with brutal efficiency. Guards opened every envelope, blacked out words with heavy ink, or simply discarded anything deemed suspicious. Families sometimes received blank scraps with half the text removed, a puzzle of missing thoughts. Prisoners could send only a few letters a year, often dictated by rules that changed without notice. The quirky detail? Some prisoners became experts at Aesopian language, writing hidden messages through code, double meanings, or shared family jokes that censors wouldn't catch. A line about our neighbour's rooster might mean the guard with the dog. A mention of my coat is warm could mean I am freezing to death. Families sometimes crack the codes, other times they remained puzzles no one could solve. You wait weeks, months, for a reply. When it finally arrives, the barracks gathers around you like it's Christmas morning. The paper is thin, the handwriting shaky but familiar. Your wife, or sister, or father, whoever still remembers you, writes, "We miss you, we pray for you. Come home soon." You trace the letters with your finger until the paper nearly tears. The words glow hotter than soup, richer than bread. For a night, you feel less erased, but many letters never come. You see men waiting, always waiting, asking at roll call if mail has arrived. Guards shrug, laugh, or wave them off. Weeks stretch into years. Some prisoners stop asking. They say nothing, but you watch their eyes dull, as if hope itself has been censored. The scholarly debate here is sharp. Were letters tools of control, designed to string men along with false connection? Or did they genuinely matter? Small threads of humanity smuggled through the cracks. Some survivors said letters kept them alive, proof that someone still knew their name. Others confessed that silence killed them faster than cold, that waiting for words that never came was worse than no hope at all. One evening, the scholar shows you his treasure, a letter so old the paper is yellow, edges frayed. He keeps it tucked in his boot, reads it by firelight once a week, and whispers the words as if they're a charm. The letter says almost nothing. We are well. The garden grows. The neighbour's cow is sick, but he holds it like scripture. This is my village, he tells you after folded in paper. You wonder what will happen if no letters ever reach you. Will you remember the sound of your mother's voice, the smell of home, the warmth of hands once held? Or will silence eat those things, just as the cold eats your feet? You tuck your own letter under your chest as you sleep, praying it will survive the night without rats chewing the corners. And in the dark, as the wind hisses through the cracks, you whisper words you cannot write. I am not well. I am starving. I am afraid. Then you close your eyes, imagining someone somewhere reading them, even if the paper never leaves your hand. Rumours move faster than sled dogs in the Gulag. They slip through cracks in the barracks walls, carried on whispers from camp to camp, passed in half-finished sentences by new arrivals. Most are nonsense, stories invented to dull the hunger or make sense of the senseless. But every so often, one rumour sparks like lightning and leaves everyone stunned in silence. The biggest of them all arrives one morning when a prisoner leans across the work line and mutters, "Stalin is dead." The words hit harder than any rifle butt. For a moment, axes stop mid-swing, picks hang in the air, horses snort impatiently. The silence is terrifying. You expect guards to explode in rage, to beat the rumour out of existence. But they don't. They just glance at each other, confused, uneasy. And that's when you realise this might not be a joke. Something has shifted beyond the barbed wire. Historical fact. Joseph Stalin died on March 5th, 1953. His death sent shockwaves through the Gulag system, where millions languished under sentences tied directly to his regime. News filtered in unevenly. Some camps knew within days, others weeks later. Guards themselves often didn't know what to do, caught between loyalty to the old man and fear of the future. The quirky detail, prisoners celebrated in strange, dangerous ways. Some whispered toasts over watery soup. Others dared to sing half-forbidden songs. In one camp, a prisoner reportedly carved 1953 into the barrack wall and kissed the numbers like they were holy icons. At the same time, fear lingered. Was this a trick? Was Stalin truly dead, or was the rumour planted to test loyalty? In your camp, the news spreads like fire through dry pine. Whispers become speculation. Will there be amnesty? Will the camps open? Some insist Beria, Stalin's feared secret police chief, will free everyone to buy favour. Others say nothing will change. Systems this vast don't crumble overnight. The debates grow heated, men's eyes shining, with desperate hope they swore they'd buried years ago. Scholars still debate the psychological effect of Stalin's death in the Gulag. Some memoirs describe it as a turning point, when despair cracked open just enough to let in light. Others argue it was crueler, sparking hope that took years to be realised. Amnesty waves did come, but slowly, unevenly, leaving many to rot for years longer. For every man freed, another died still waiting. That night, the barracks feels electric. Men whisper of Moscow funerals, of crowds weeping in the streets, of statues draped in black. You wonder how much is true. Maybe Stalin lies in a coffin right now, face waxy under glass. Maybe crowds chant his name even as you curse it. The paradox twists your stomach. Outside, grief. Inside, trembling joy. A thief, usually loud and cruel, sits quietly sharpening the knife. If he's really gone, he mutters, the rules change. No one answers. You're all too busy listening to the wind, half expecting it to carry a new order through the fence. Days pass. Nothing changes, and yet everything feels different. Roll calls still drag on, quotas still loom, guards still shout. But beneath it all hums a dangerous undercurrent. Possibility. You catch yourself thinking of home without instantly crushing the thought. You dare to imagine leaving footprints outside the wire that don't lead back. And then, one evening, a guard, half drunk, half brave, leans against the barracks door and mutters, "It's true. The Vozhd is gone." His eyes are wild, unreadable. He slams the door and leaves before anyone can respond. The room exhales all at once, like men surfacing from underwater. For the first time in years, you feel a word you barely recognise. Hope. But hope is dangerous here. It flares too bright, burns too fast. You lie awake that night, listening to men whisper about release, about trains heading west, about families waiting. You want to believe them. You also know the Gulag has ways of turning hope into another form of punishment. You clutch your bread ration, heart racing, and whisper to yourself, if he is dead, maybe I live. The rumour of Stalin's death doesn't stay rumour for long. Weeks later, guards read an official order in the yard. Amnesty decrees signed in Pobia in Moscow, cascading outward like thawed rivers breaking ice. The word release slices through the camp like an axe blade. You can feel men straighten in the cold as though they've just remembered their spines. For years, the only certainty has been snow, hunger, and quotas, but suddenly, paper carries the possibility of freedom. But the amnesty is not simple. The decrees cover certain categories: short sentences, petty crimes, some juveniles, some women with young children. Political prisoners, the so-called enemies of the people, are mostly excluded. The announcement is cruelly precise: not you, not yet. Till even that sliver cracks the camp open. Some men cheer, some weep, some collapse onto their knees as though the snow itself is holy ground. Historical fact: after Stalin's death in 1953, Lavrenti Beria pushed for mass amnesties. Over 1 million prisoners were released, though most were criminals, not politicals. Later reforms under Khrushchev widened the releases, but unevenly. Some camps emptied quickly, others remained frozen in time for years. Quirky fact, memoirs recall prisoners rushing to the gates with whatever belongings they had: scraps of paper, bent spoons, even lice-infested coats, terrified the guards might change their minds. Some men kissed the barbed wire on their way out, as if thanking it for sparing their lives. Others refused to leave, too broken to imagine the outside world, preferring the bitter certainty of the Gulag over the unknown chaos of freedom. The camp seethes with tension. Those chosen for amnesty are treated like walking miracles, envied and resented in equal measure. They pack their meagre possessions, exchange clumsy farewells, and shuffle toward the gate under guard escort. You watch one man, eyes hollow, body thin as wire, turn at the threshold and shout back to the yard, "You'll follow soon!" His voice cracks, half promise, half prayer, but the rest of you stay. Roll call resumes, quotas remain. Work brigades march into the forest as if nothing has changed, and yet everything has. You feel it in the way men whisper again about home, about trains, about bread not measured in grams. Even those who know their sentences won't be lifted cling to the idea that the ice is finally cracking. Scholars debate the amnesty wave's meaning. Some call them the true beginning of the Gulag's decline, the moment the machinery began to sputter. Others argue they were pragmatic, not moral. Moscow needed labourers free to rebuild cities, criminals released to ease overcrowding. Politics dressed up as compassion. Either way, the effect inside the wire was explosive. For the first time, freedom wasn't just a dream, it had statistics, decrees, names on lists. In the barracks, you hear men plotting futures again. One says he'll walk back to Ukraine even if it takes years. Another swears he'll never leave Russia again, afraid of exile's shadow. The scholar says quietly, "If I am released, I will teach again, even if only one pupil listens." His voice shakes, not from cold but from the audacity of imagining life beyond barbed wire. You don't know where you stand. Hope is a double-edged tool. It makes you breathe easier, but it also sharpens hunger. You imagine stepping off a train into the arms of family, then remember some of them might already be gone. You imagine eating bread without ration stamps, then remember your stomach might not know how to handle plenty anymore. Freedom itself feels like another kind of gamble. The next morning, the guards call names. A handful of prisoners step forward, stunned, blinking like men in a dream. You watch them walk toward the gate, snow crunching under their boots, and you realise something terrifying. You envy them, but you also fear being one of them. After years of surviving inside, can you survive outside? The question gnaws at you as deeply as hunger ever did. And when the gate slams shut behind the last of the amnestied, silence falls heavy over the yard. Those left behind shuffle back to labour, shoulders bowed, tin tags clinking like chains. Hope lingers, yes, but it burns hot and dangerous. It will either keep you alive or kill you faster than the cold ever could. Release doesn't come with trumpets. It doesn't even come with certainty. One morning, after years of frozen routines, a guard shouts your number during roll call. Not with menace this time, but with bureaucratic flatness. Pack. The word feels alien. For a moment, you think it's punishment, another trip to the icebox. But then he adds, "You're leaving." Your heart stutters. You've imagined this moment so many times that when it finally arrives, it feels less like salvation and more like vertigo. Packing is laughable. What do you own? A dented spoon? A patched mitten? Maybe a scrap of paper hidden in your boot. The guard hands you a slip of paper stamped in red, your official release, and waves you toward the gate. The barracks watches in Siberion's faces unreadable. Some envy, some pity, some nothing at all. You step forward with knees trembling as if your legs have forgotten how to walk without chains of routine. Historical fact. Released prisoners were often dumped in nearby towns with little more than documents, sometimes forbidden from returning home. Others were shipped west in overcrowded trains, retracing the same routes that had once carried them into exile. Many faced eternal exile clauses, barring them from major cities. Release didn't mean freedom. It meant a new kind of sentence. Quirky fact, memoirs tell of men stepping off trains in their threadbare camp clothes, mistaken by locals for beggars or madmen. Some scavenged discarded civilian coats from garbage heaps, swapping their numbered jackets for anonymity. Others clung to their camp clothes out of superstition, unwilling to shed the uniform that had become a second skin. One man even kept his tin chest tag as a grim souvenir, hanging it by his door in the free world as a reminder of survival. You walk beyond the gate, past the dogs straining at leashes, past the watchtowers glaring down with their searchlights, past the wire that once defined your whole universe. The snow outside looks the same as the snow inside, but it tastes different when the wind hits your face. Colder, sharper, impossibly vast. You realise that for the first time in years, no one is counting your steps. The absence of numbers feels like falling. The first town you reach is little more than a smear of wooden houses and smoke rising from chimneys. Children stare at you wide-eyed as though you've crawled out of a legend. Some villagers avert their gaze, muttering ZK under their breath. Prisoner. Others press bread into your hands, pity softening their eyes. You eat it too quickly, sister, your stomach rebelling against sudden abundance. Pain twists your gut, a reminder that even freedom requires relearning how to live. The scholar was right. Leaving is its own battle. You try to imagine home, but the thought wobbles like a broken wheel. Will they even recognise you? Will you recognise them? And what if they're gone, swallowed by time or war or exile of their own? The questions press heavier than the cold ever did. Scholars wrestle with this phase of Gulag history. Was release true liberation, or simply another adjustment in suffering? Many freed prisoners face stigma, branded enemies of the people for life. Jobs were scarce, families scattered, names tarnished. Some ended up back in camps after being denounced again. The cycle spun on even with the gates open. One night, in a cramped station hut, you share a bench with other newly released men. One toasts with a crust of bread, raising it like champagne, to survival. Another mutters, "To what end?" The silence that follows is heavier than the toast. You chew slowly, tasting not just bread but the weight of years. When you finally glimpse your village, or city, or whatever patch of earth you once called yours, it feels both familiar and alien. Roofs tilt the same way, smoke curls the same way, but you no longer fit inside the picture. People glance at you with suspicion, curiosity, fear. Some embrace you, some avoid you. You realise freedom doesn't erase the camp, it just relocates it inside your chest, where no decree can reach. That night, in a bed softer than any plank, under a quilt instead of a lice-ridden blanket, you still jolt awake expecting the whistle. Your fingers grope instinctively for the spoon at your wrist, though it isn't there anymore. You breathe, heart hammering, and whisper to yourself, "I am free." But the words taste strange. Freedom feels less like arrival, and more like a question you don't yet know how to answer. Freedom doesn't wipe Siberia off your skin. It clings, stubborn as frost, etched into bones and memory alike. Weeks, months, even years after stepping beyond the gates, you catch yourself moving in the old rhythms, eating too fast, hiding scraps of bread under your pillow, glancing over your shoulder whenever you walk down a road. A dropped stick sounds like a rifle bolt. A barking dog makes your stomach seize. You're not in the Gulag anymore, but the Gulag is still in you. You meet others who've returned, in train stations, in villages, in half-empty towns scarred by war and hunger. You recognise the same hollow look in their eyes. Survivors nod to each other in silence, as though speaking might shatter the fragile illusion of being free. Some cling to each other, forming small communities of former prisoners, telling stories late into the night. Others stay quiet, unwilling or unable to put words to what happened. You realise the silence is its own language, a way of surviving after survival. Historical fact: many Gulag survivors were not fully rehabilitated until decades later, some not until the late 80s. Even after release, they faced restrictions on where they could live and work. Special settlers were sent to remote villages, forbidden from entering major cities. Reunions with families were often bittersweet, children grown into strangers, spouses remarried, parents dead. The Gulag ended on paper, but its shadow trailed men and women for lifetimes. The quirky fact: some prisoners, once freed, carried habits forever. One man never again ate bread without first carefully cutting it into exact equal slices. Another hoarded matches in glass jars, unable to forget the nights when fire meant life. Survivors spoke of sleeping with boots beside their beds long into old age, just in case the whistle came again. Small rituals, absurd outside the camp, but holy for those who knew. The scholars debate endlessly. What is survival? Is it merely drawing breath after ordeal, or is it reclaiming something of your humanity once stolen? Some argue survivors carried trauma like chains, unable to ever step fully out of Siberia. Others suggest resilience. Teaching, writing, rebuilding proved that even in the frozen hell, human spirit endured. The truth lies tangled between those poles. You know because you live it daily. Free, yet not free, alive, yet never entirely whole. Sometimes you tell your story. People lean close, eyes wide, shaking their heads in disbelief. It can't have been that bad, they say. Or worse, why didn't you fight back? You laugh, bitter and hollow. How do you explain hunger so sharp it felt like a second skeleton? How do you explain marching into forests that swallowed men whole? Or punishment cells where the cold seeped into your marrow forever? Words shrink against the weight of memory, so you fall silent, letting them imagine. Silence is easier than disbelief, but other times you speak. To your children, perhaps, or to students if you manage to teach again. You tell them about bread the size of your palm, about songs hummed under blankets, about the man who shared half his ration though he was starving too. You tell them about snow that glowed under starlight and mosquitoes that swarmed like armies. You don't try to explain everything. You just plant fragments, like breadcrumbs leading back through the white void. At night, when the house is quiet, you sometimes wake and mistake the creak of floorboards for the clink of your tin chest tag. You reach for it instinctively, then realise it's gone, melted into memory. Still, in your mind, you feel its weight against your chest, cold and undeniable. The number is gone from your jacket, but it lingers in your bones. The Gulag does not vanish when you walk out of its gates. It lingers in posture, in habits, in dreams. It lingers in the way you flinch at laughter that sounds too sharp, in the way you never quite trust warm rooms, in the way you always finish your bread. Siberia's frozen hell becomes part of you, not in the way of scars you can show, but in invisible etchings across your soul. And so you carry it, not proudly, not willingly, but because carrying is the only option left. Each memory is both burden and proof. You were there, you survived. You lived through the ultimate winter hell, and though freedom is complicated, fractured, incomplete, you're here, breathing, telling, remembering, and that in the end is the only victory the Gulag cannot erase. So here we are, at the end of this long march together. If you've stayed with me from the rattle of the prison train all the way to this uneasy freedom, then you've seen what survival really looked like in Siberia's frozen gulags. It wasn't about heroism, it wasn't about strength in the way movies like to imagine. It was about endurance, improvisation, and sometimes sheer stubbornness to breathe one more day in a world that seemed designed to strip breath away. The Gulag wasn't only barbed wire and guards, it was hunger measured in grams of bread, boots patched with straw, mosquitoes thick as smoke, punishments that froze into memory. But it was also small rebellions. A crust shared, a song hummed, a spoon tied to a wrist. Those flickers of humanity mattered as much as any ration. Without them, the cold would have won long before the body stopped moving. even after release. Survivors carried the camp with them. You can't shake off years of living as a number, or waiting for a whistle, or counting every crumb like treasure. They learned to build lives again, but the Gulag lived on in their habits, their silences, their eyes. And in a way, it lives on in us too, every time we remember their stories. So tonight, as you turn off the light and let the hum of the fan take over, hold on to one thought. History isn't just dates and decrees, it's people shivering in barracks, laughing at dark jokes, whispering letters never sent, trudging through snow that never ends. It's memory carried forward so we don't let the silence win. Sleep well and dream warm, you've earned it.